Sara, need something. You're in the right room, yeah. Anywhere on this table. Sara will be there in the middle. If you take over the other ones.
Okay.
Hi, is it working?
Yes.
Yes, is it working? Can we ask everyone to come a bit closer to the front? Just because it's a panel, so the room won't be full, so it'd be more convivial if we're all closer together. We are getting ready to start. We're just waiting for one speaker. One of the speakers has been held up, so we're not going to wait too long, but we'll just wait a minute or two longer just in case.
The speakers are part of the audience.
Yes. Maybe a bit ambitious to get everyone into a cafe and back out in an hour.
I say I think we're overwhelmed the cafe.
Yeah, the bistro's a bit shit. I had to remind them to take my.
I did wonder, I went in early tonight, so I said, I've got
I am. Do you have a PowerPoint presentation?
I don't.
You don't? You're perfect.
Is it Darren? Yes. I am Sara.
Oh,
Nice to meet you. How are you? Are you still showing their PowerPoint?
No.
Okay. Just like to see.
I am Lynn.
Yes,
Hi. Yes, nice to see you.
So some people have said that a lot of people are held back in cafes.
Yes.
But she's not,
All you need to do is.
left or right. Just going right.
You can do it now.
Yeah.
Oh, it's done away.
Oh, I was really looking forward to it.
Okay, is this working now? Yeah. So I think we should start. Quite a few people are held back, but if they join us, that's all fine, and part of the informal nature of these panels. So it's good to see everyone. I understand it is quite a full-on day with lots of information, lots of discussion. So let's hear from our speakers in this panel and then have more of a conversation and discussion about how we think we challenge what the name of this panel is, which is Stopping Britain's Nuclear Nightmare. So before we start, I'm Sara Medi Jones. I'm C&D's Campaigns Director. So hello to everyone who I don't know. Hi to old friends that we're seeing again. And obviously, I would say all, but definitely most of us are here for the same reason, to get rid of Britain's nuclear weapons and to take those steps forward to a world without nuclear weapons. We know they're bad, we know they're costly, we know they're dangerous, we know they're immoral. But beyond that, what do we need to know about Britain's network of nuclear weapons, all the different parts that make up this system? And I think one really important point is how the system has a network that extends all across the UK with different towns, different factories, different communities, all playing a part in this system that we all want to scrap. So the aim of the panel today is to show that breadth. We've got speakers from every corner of the United Kingdom, but we are going to go to Scotland first. Sound a bit like a Eurovision scorer here, don't I? But yeah, so obviously that is where the submarine-based system is based. And we are joined today to talk about that in a bit more detail by Lynn Jamieson, Scottish C&D. So over to Lynn.
Thank you, Sarah. Okay, so you all know, I'll stand up because I'm small. You all know what's at HM Naval Base Clyde, which we call Fast Lane, and you know that at that sort of estuary of the Clyde River, where it's kind of fjord-like, on one of the sea locks, that's the home port of the nuclear weapon system that Sara's just mentioned. And you, I think, probably also all know that just one of those submarines, the 4 submarines that are based there, firing its missiles, would result in the nuclear winter that Stuart Parkinson has been talking to us about at this event today, and also at Scottish CND AGM. So I'm asking you to think about being there at Fastlane on the 14th of March, when Scottish CND are having a major event, and to come with, we're not assuming a mass thing, but we want it to be a representative of a lot of different constituencies. So we want you to come with a placard or a banner that says where you're from. Now, Scotland also, Scottish CND, you know that we're part of you, but we have our own sort of microclimate of politics in Scotland, our own Scottish government, and we have our own sort of struggles with the Scottish media. We are trying to project all the messages, the same messages. Sometimes we get a bit of coverage in the National, which is an independence newspaper, but we have the same trouble with Breakthrough that I think that you do too here south of the border. It's not as if we've got some sort of magic going on up there that you don't have, but it's really important for us to try to break the language that is used by the current government that is still talking about a sovereign system when we know that it's not an independent nuclear weapon system. We know that the United States leases the missiles, that the software of those targeting and control is probably very, very dependent on them. And we also know that the language of continuous deterrence at sea is putting us all at risk. And we maybe know that maybe more strongly than you, because our press do give a bit more coverage to some of the accidents and incidents that happen at Fastlane and Coalport. So Fastlane and Coalport combination, I don't think you talk about quite so much. So Coalport is the arms depot just round the corner on the other side of a peninsula in a different sea lock, where in bunkers the nuclear weapons are stored when they're not on the missiles, and it's where the loading and unloading happens and where accidents are very likely to happen. And we only know about leaks from either Coalport or Fastlane really because of the vigilance of both Scottish MPs who ask questions in Westminster and journalists in Scotland who persisted over years with freedom of information requests, and eventually the Scottish Information Commissioner said that actually the MOD's attempts to resist information being released to the public was using this idea of security, national security, to prevent what was in fact in the public interest and wasn't a matter of national security. And because of that combination of the work of our representatives and journalists and the Scottish Information Commissioner, we know that there's been persistent leaks from Coalport, from a whole set of pipes that constantly are allowing radioactivity to go into the ground, to leach into the loch. And I don't think that kind of thing gets the same publicity down there. And it's the Scottish Environmental Protection Agency that was being, if you like, browbeaten by the Ministry of Defence to not release that, but in the end did their duty, their public duty, and released it. So we have our own set of institutions around these things that we try our best to put pressure on. And I just want to say that this event at Fastlane is in the build-up to the election election in 2006, the Scottish election. So at the moment, we have 129 members of the Scottish Parliament, 60 of them are the Scottish National Party and 7 are the Greens. So, you know, you can see 60 plus 7 is a bit more than half of 129. So we actually have a majority anti-nuclear government. And they speak anti-nuclear, they are resisting the militarization to some extent, and they are saying no more nuclear power will ever be built in Scotland, despite enormous pressure, including from what we're now calling the legacy press, that floods all of us with their nonsense about calling it a student politics, calling them infantile for standing against nuclear issues and standing against militarization. But they are doing what they can, and you hear all about what they don't do and what they fail to do, and you hear very little about what they do and how strong sometimes they actually are, and how they did use the genocide word, and they were trying to do their best to stop exports going through Scotland to Israel and being used in Gaza and so on. But you never actually hear very much about that, I don't think, south of the border. So we are desperately trying in the election in 2006 in May to try to keep an anti-nuclear government. And it is, I can't tell you how important. So at the last UK election, Labour made enormous gains. There's 57 MPs at Westminster from Scotland. Now 37 of them are Labour. And before that, we could say we had all our representatives, the majority of them were anti-nuclear. We cannot say that anymore. Now, you probably know that Scottish C&D did take a kind of pro-independence stance, partly because of our previous administrator, organiser, campaigner, John Ainsley, who wrote many very detailed technical reports, including Trident, No Place to Go, and Disarming Trident, showing that there's nothing like the combination of Fastlane and Coolport that could cope with Trident if it had to go somewhere else. And so it would effectively disarm the UK if we had an independent Scotland. We're not party political, we're not advocating for any political party, but we are trying our best to get rid of nuclear weapons. And we really need to be able to say that we've got widespread support, and only then will we be able to keep strengthening the will of our current Scottish anti-nuclear, standing against nuclear power and nuclear weapons, understanding the link between the two, saying not for us. We need to keep that in Scotland as best we can.
Thank you very much, Lynn. And if you do care about achieving a world without nuclear weapons, I definitely sort of suggest you go along to that demonstration in Fastlane. I find it a very sinister place myself, and it really struck me the time that I went to a protest there. It's a very important experience, I think, as an anti-nuclear campaigner. Fastlane in Scotland is where the submarines themselves are based. The warheads that fit on the missiles on those submarines are made and serviced down in Berkshire, and right there around my counties. And so now we're going to hear from Di MacDonald, who is an anti-nuclear campaigner but specialising in the work around Aldermaston and the warheads. Thank you, Di.
I'm the same, I'm small, so I'm going to stand up too. So, closing down Britain's...
Can you lift it up?
Oh, sorry.
No, just lift it up. Keep it near your mouth. Nearer your mouth.
Near my mouth.
Yeah.
Got it. Long time since I've done this sort of thing. Right. Thank you to CND for inviting me to speak at this crucial conference. And for my money, Marham is the issue of the day. I don't know if I can get it. It's more in my mouth.
Perfect. No, that's perfect.
Right. Marham, got it? Is the issue of the day. This high-risk proposal to store US nuclear bombs and buy US planes to deploy them threatens us all, including the MOD and the RAF, who must be tearing their hair out. This high-risk proposal, rather than a deal, it's a takeover to extend US nuclear capacity in East Anglia on this very small island at no cost to the supplier, who will make a profit apart from the inevitable cost of USAF military guards for the weapons store. This threat further reduces the MOD's capacity to manage its present nuclear problems at AWE in Aldermaston, Devonport, Rosyth, Barrow, Rolls-Royce, Derby, Sellafield Waste Store, and Faslane, where the daily pressure to find and train submariners is straining MOD capacity as never before. Marham has a history. It was upgraded by the Americans to have nuclear weapons bunkers in the 1980s, which we presume have remained empty and mothballed ever since. Public data coyly states that sources suggest that these secure underground vaults have been dismantled or filled in. It's now a training base with few operational flights, according to plane spotters. Well, those are increasing, and there has been at least one flight from Marham to Israel. RAF Honington is only 30 miles away from Marham, and several other RAF bases are in East Anglia. There seems no need for Marham at all, except for their nuclear bunkers. In the early 1990s, AWE nuclear convoys to and from RAF Honington with WE-177 freefall bombs were monitored by Polaris Watch, who also tracked convoys to Portsmouth, taking WE-177 nuclear depth charges to be loaded onto aircraft carriers. The Navy was prepared to drop these nuclear bombs from helicopters on enemy submarines in the Atlantic. The decision to withdraw both RAF nuclear roles were announced in the 1995 Defence Review, and they were all gone by 1998. How did all this knowledge and subsequent disarmament come about? In the same way that cruise missile convoys were monitored by Greenham Women and Cruise Watch after they left the USAF Greenham Common Base, Polaris Watch monitored the WE-177 convoys. Sea Action monitored and protested in small boats in the Solent and Portsmouth Harbour as the carriers departed and returned with weapons to be unloaded and then convoyed back to AWE. Well, you know what happened to crews and to the WE-177s. Public knowledge and understanding of all the safety risks became the driver for nuclear disarmament. Safety and nuclear disarmament were the issues leading to the removal of the RAF's nuclear role. Activists and others, including a helicopter crew member, said at a Portsmouth MOD public meeting that the safety of naval helicopter crews could not be guaranteed if dropping a nuclear depth bomb. Well, we could have told them that, couldn't we? Nor the crews of the carrier. It seems likely that this risk was the driving issue for all WE-177s to be recalled. But recalled they were. Now, missed it out somewhere here. Where's my other bit of paper? Lost it. Well, you'll be pleased to know I'm going to conclude. The resurrection of Marham is now not a done deal. We haven't come up with the done deal. We don't see it happening. And although there's a lot of talk and the decisions that the MOD and the RAF have to make haven't been explored, quite apart from the money, which lots of other people can talk about. But I've got just a few words that I think we need to have in our lexicon when we're campaigning about getting rid of this new arrangement. And I think we need to arm politicians and the public, who are very important, and the activists with these clear words. One is deal. As far as I can see, this is not a done deal, and it does not have to be started. Whose idea is it anyway? Proposed is a suggestion, not a completed fact. Threat. This is for bullies and needs calm, informed challenge. Disproportionate. The long-term vast cost to no UK benefit. Safety, a word the public understands regarding nuclear weapons. Risk, a word the public understands regarding nuclear weapons in the digital age. And East Anglia, which is the last two words, as the best term to locate Marham. Peace building, like decommissioning, is the logical and safer route to go. It doesn't come cheap, it doesn't come easy, but it takes us nearer the goal of international harmony and real safety. Thank you.
Thanks, Guy. Touching on new plans there by the government to launch an air-based nuclear weapon system, which we're covering quite a lot in sessions today. So if we sort of go back now to the submarine-based system that we already have in this country, I think something that's under-discussed a lot is the effects it has on the communities which host part of these weapons. And I noticed myself, I went to Barrow earlier this year, and Barrow's promised the world when it comes to nuclear weapons. I think it's been made a royal port recently because of, what Barrow is meant to present to the world. But when you walk around Barrow, it's a very sad and depressed town in many ways because the money is not filtering through to the average person on the street. And I think this is something we do need to talk a lot more about. So I'm delighted to say we're joined by Tony Staunton, a C&D Vice Chair, but also representing Plymouth C&D today. And he's going to talk about sort of living in Devonport and near Devonport, where another part of Britain's nuclear weapon system is based. So over to Tony.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Can you hear me? That's the fastest tour of Britain I think I've ever seen. And I have to say much faster than the trains.
Yes.
But that's another story completely. Look, as Vice Chair, I chair the campaigns group, which is trying to facilitate and coordinate the local CND branches and campaigns across England and Wales, at least, as you've heard. Scotland, quite rightly, is somewhere else. But the issue of that really is how do we get more people into CND? How do we get more active? And how do we actually build the opposition to the nuclear weapons and the nuclear weaponry? And so everything I want to say this afternoon is simply we need as CND to be involved in whatever is moving around us, whatever other campaigns are happening. And of course there's Palestine, and there's the climate, as we've heard this morning. And really also, we must not neglect the trade unions. And I have to say that's a Plymouth lesson, as well as a national one. So, thank you. So that's the sort of context. In other words, tactically, we've got to be part of a wider movement and make sure we take CND and anti-nuclear into all the other campaigns. Strategically,
you will need to just whenever you will say, just next slide. Yeah.
Okay, next slide. Strategically, we want to shut Britain's nuclear bases. So one follows the other. If we get a critical mass of campaigning across the movement, we actually expose the nuclear bases, we expose the horror of nuclear weapons, and most importantly, we expose the cost of nuclear weapons. And that's really my slogan. Oh, and that's really my slogan is, and it's a C&D's slogan, which is welfare, not warfare. With budget demonstrations coming up next Tuesday and Wednesday, it's a golden opportunity for us to put the costs of nuclear forward, not simply the financial costs, but of course the community costs as well. But I thought this was quite interesting. I just found two maps. They're on CND's education web pages. But the reality is, here's the nuclear subs. I've highlighted them because that's what I know most about, but Lincoln, Heath and Marham are absolutely crucial to us in terms of that extension of what was traditionally a naval nuclear armed force in Britain, and now is naval and air. And I can't understate just how huge that is. The shift, the submarines are still there, but now Britain is going to be a base for launching air-shot nuclear missiles and bombs. This side is just what's the sort of fallout, because if you've got some of that, then you're a target for some of that. That makes sense, doesn't it? And there's the obliteration of Britain, just as a sort of reminder, really. Of course, you can debate on that. So what we've got, Faslane and Caldrose up at the top. We've got Barrow-in-Furness, Derby in the middle, and Plymouth down the bottom. The naval engineers and military in Faslane mess about with the submarines to a point where they break down, and then they come down to Plymouth Devonport to be mended, is the simplest way of putting this, really. So Caldrose has the bombs, and we officially don't, but because the Vanguard class is now in such a condition that it's touch and go as to whether they actually keep the statutory one at sea at any one time, because they break down now. They're past their sell-by date, and they come in and come out, and they cost billions actually. I'll come on to that. The Barrow-in-Furness, of course, is growing the new dreadnought submarines. I think officially at £1.2 billion each one at the moment, but they haven't produced one yet, and the date is going backwards and backwards and backwards towards the mid-30s, because they've got. I always learnt with Airfix kits and Lego that you don't start building it till you've got a plan, as to what it's going to look like at the end. But with tax billions, they've just started building the next generation of submarines without a plan. And so now they've got huge problems with the reactors. They can't really work out how to fit things in. And they're eating themselves alive on, can't we have that technology and that technology, to a point where it's just not going to work. Anyway, you can't make it up, really, except it's the truth. So, next one, So, what I wanted to skip through is just what it's like in those places. And I live in the centre of Plymouth. But as Sarah said, we went up to Barrow-in-Furness early this year, and it's poverty. Because there's a technicality to building something nuclear, and that is that you need technicians, and you need very, very highly qualified specialists. And so most of the people who actually work on the machines, on the designs of the building, are very well paid. So they don't live anywhere near where these sites are, because the sites, that is the BAE Systems in the middle of Barrow, and it's in the middle of Barrow-in-Furness, and it dominates the entire city, especially when it's flooded at night. And the whole town around it is very, very impoverished. The deeper red, the poorer people are. Multiple deprivation. So this all the time we get told that it's about jobs, and we get told that it's about money into the local community. But it's not. The money's going to be taken out of the local community. That's one, if you would. And that is the case in all those centres. Talk to people in Derby. Talk to people. Actually, I mean, it's interesting around Lake and Heath. It's slightly different demography, but at the same time, there's some very wealthy people who aren't around there, and there's people who need a job and do the grunt work. So the next one is Plymouth, which, as I say, I know more about. There it is. It's 4 miles of military hardware. I don't know if you can see there, but I just want to rub this in. Those are nuclear submarines that are past their sell-by date, and they're rotting at anchor there. And if you've got the budget in your head, then it's ever since 2010, this costs £30 million a year to just keep those rotting hulks with nuclear cores inside them safe enough, as they say, for the people of Plymouth. Just here is a main road, and just there is one of the large primary schools in Plymouth, and it's 400 feet from a wall behind which low and medium level nuclear waste is stored in tanks. And so the school has a fire alarm system, but also a nuclear alarm system for if there's a leak. And there's been 10 significant leaks from that in the last 10 years. 20 years, sorry, 10 to 20 years, yeah? Reported, by the way. So you can see the issues here. There's about 5,500 employees altogether. The majority of those are in trade unionist service grants. And you know, there's quite a lot of minimum wage, but there's quite a lot of average wage there as well. If you take it compared with other places, so we have the regional hospital just up the road, and that's double the staffing, for example, but it's in total crisis. Not least that we're losing migrant workers who are feeling threatened in Britain and going away from their nursing jobs. But it's in total crisis. Then we've got schools, etc. You understand that. This has now, it's just had £1 billion spent to refit there, and now it's got another £4 billion coming in. 4 billion, that's 4,000 million pounds coming in for the dreadnought, to prepare for the dreadnought servicing system. The rest of the city, that's the next one if you don't mind, is in significant deprivation. I mean, the ward I live in the centre of Plymouth, and the wind for most of the wind for most of the year comes straight off the dockyard and straight down my back garden. But I'm in the second poorest ward. The Devonport, 1 in 3 children are living in poverty, right all the way around that dockyard that you see. And the Babcock profit, you see, that's just, I sometimes find myself so naive, but actually, the military, the MOD, nuclear weapon facility, is privately owned. It's Babcock. It's not like BAE. It's not. This isn't a state business. It's outsourced to a private company that makes profit out of it. And Babcock is going to, out of that 4 billion, is going to make about £1 billion in profit. That's the sort of rate, which is about 3 times the average rate of a business expected business profit. I just think they're gangsters and it's a con, really. Why I wanted to raise Babcock is because Babcock dominates Plymouth just in the way that BAE dominates Barrow, or Rolls-Royce dominates Derby, and therefore this is why we have to talk about trade unions, because if they dominate, then we've got to have a counter propaganda and a counter imagination and image. I mean, this is Plymouth Argyle might mean something to you. To me, it doesn't really to you. But there's Babcock right the way across the football pitch. There's Babcock in our hospital. There's Babcock in our university. Massive funding domination of our university. All these things have to be thought about. Babcock goes into our schools, yeah, and funds some little granty things whilst pushing Babcock in our schools, in our secondary schools. Our primary schools now are targeted for the military to go in as part of Starmer's new assault, really, ideological assault. And what we're getting now is they're moving on. I just wanted to say that's called a glider. It's actually an unstaffed electric submarine, like a drone, that is now being built. The German company has been brought in under this 4 billion into Plymouth as part of a free port, where it can import and export its parts without any taxation whatsoever, to build these gliders for the MOD, which are then going to tour around the Isles of Britain. And very, very usefully, just before it was launched this week, they found that there was a Russian spy ship just in international waters, which became front page news, because then the next day, oh look, it's all right, we're spending loads of money on these electric submarines. Electric submarines, they're green. This is part of our whole zero economy, wonderful new green impetus for Plymouth. I know I've got to shut up. One more try. So we have been campaigning very arm in arm with the climate campaigns in Plymouth for a long time to say what that 4 miles of nuclear dockyard could be transferred into. Because we're the windiest and wettest city, I challenge you anywhere else to actually be able to get anywhere near our potential wind and wave power. And we've got 3/4 of the trade union movement. Plymouth Trade Union Council has become, over decades, a centre for anti-nuclear work. We've got NEU, PCS, Unison, FBU, RMT, NASU, WT, people won't like that in the NEU, Bakers Union, and we're trying to get into the students' union, trying to get into the students to combat that thought. I hope that's sort of an overview. That's what we're doing.
Thank you so much, Tony. I think I'm with Lynn here. I think Aberdeen is going to give Plymouth a run for its money.
No, we're wet. We're really wet.
Try Wales.
Okay, thank you so much, Tony. That was very informative and could look at maps all day, so thank you. And now, if I actually was Eurovision judge, I would give my dues plan to the next speaker, because he's from C&D Cymru and I'm biased. So we are now going to hear a slightly different angle. One of the speakers alluded to it earlier, in that the nuclear power industry in this country is very much intertwined with the nuclear weapons industry, through subsidies, through shared technologies, through shared skills. So to speak a bit about that link and a bit about the situation in Wales, I'm going to pass on to Dylan Lewis-Rowlands. Thank you, Dylan.
Iawn, shwmae pawb, Dylan Lewis-Rowlands dwi, ysgrifennu gynulleidfa ac yn Cymru, siarad ni'n heddi o'n cysylltiad rhwng y nuclear a'r nuclear.
I'll translate.
Don't worry, the rest of it's not in Welsh, but this part is. Ac beth sy'n digwydd yn Cymru yn allweddol I deall, mae'n deall beth sy'n digwydd popman arall. And before everyone else is worried, I'm going to do the entire thing in English. Don't worry, this is the rest of it will be in Saesneg. So, do I need the mic, or do I have a Welsh projection? I'll use the mic. I'll use the mic. Is it on? Hello? Yeah. There you go. Right. So I'm Dylan Lewis-Rowlands, the National Secretary of C&D Cymru. That's Welsh C&D. I'm speaking today about the developments in Wales and the connections, the intertwined civil and military nuclear industries, and why they are important to understand and to be able to place the wider British and international context in its correct place. So Wales has always been at the periphery of the historic empire, while also being at its heart. It, in some ways, it was a colony before colonialism, it was imperialised before imperialism. I'm not going to quote the language or theory of colonialism anymore, because that's a nuanced topic that requires much, much more time than I have here, but it is important to understand how that particular framework does colour our history and our current relationship with the other nations of these arts, particularly the one I'm in the heart of right now, that is the English and eventually British metropole. So Wales's role as a feeder of the English and eventually British machine is long established. From farmland to fisheries, copper to coal, extraction has always been a reality to the Welsh experience. And so too has been the devastation that such extraction has left behind. And it's in this context we have to understand the most recent developments in Wales regarding nuclear power and militarisation. Before I get to the nuclear power angle, some brief facts to understand the militarisation of Wales. 86% of Welsh airspace is classed as low-flying or ultra-low-flying zones for British, American and NATO forces to use. In some parts of Wales, particularly just northwest of where I live in Aberystwyth, jets will regularly fly only 600 feet off the ground in the infamous Mach Loop, a training run from RAF Valley down to Machynlleth, across to Aberystwyth, and then back up to RAF Valley. Wales hosts multiple training grounds for ground forces too. To name just one, Epynt, a community and farms, the last mostly Welsh-speaking ones in Brecknockshire, that was cleared nearly 90 years ago for the military to begin conducting live fire tests. Our seas aren't safe either. Over the summer, just before and just after tourists come, I'm not going to unpack that sentence, the waters and airspace of Bae Ceredigion are designated as a special area of conservation and protected special area of conservation, are closed in order to allow live fire and drone tests to be conducted out of Medi Abertawe. Tests that develop the technology used by genocidal regimes across the world, including Israel. It's with those facts that I ask you to listen to what I'm saying today. Wales will be, it is now confirmed, will be the staging ground for the unproven technology of SMNRs, so-called small modular nuclear reactors. To paraphrase Voltaire, are not small, they're not really modular, or they are definitely nuclear reactors. It is the beautiful island of Ynys Môn, where I think Sara's from, that is Anglesey, to give us the correct name, by the way, that will host this fabulous new experimental technology. Built by Rolls-Royce, who have no experience in this area, funded by £2.5 billion of our taxes, and based on a whole lot of fantasies about cheap bills and good jobs, Wilfa Newydd will now host 3, though in the subtext maybe up to 8, SMNRs. Those lucky few of you who don't know the ins and outs of SMRs, they are essentially nuclear reactors concentrated into small cells. But that must be deployed in greater numbers in order to even approach being economical. They are the size they are for a few reasons. I'm going to talk about 2 very notable ones today, fuel and containment. Their fuel is not the usual fuel, mined and enriched by heavily exploited workers in the global south, to roughly 5% enrichment. Instead, their fuel will likely be what's called HALEU fuel, that is high acid, low enriched uranium. That is usually enriched by those same heavily exploited global south workers, I cannot emphasize that enough, whose average lifespan, by the way, is roughly 35 years, to 15 to 20% level of enrichment. That's enriched enough to make a dirty bomb. That fuel is then placed inside a reactor and capped. But critically, it's not double contained or fitted with a capture core that will prevent leakage in the case of an accident. Higher enriched fuel, but lower standards. Not a recipe for safety, but certainly a recipe for profits. Rolls-Royce has said privately, deep in briefing documents, that they will not build until 15 have been ordered to ensure profitability. Whilst they say at the same time that the new announcement by the government means that spades are going to be in the ground by 2026 and neutrons will be hitting atoms by 2030. With one hand they give us, the other hand they take it away. The estimated peak job numbers will be 3,000 during construction, a sorely needed boost to an island economy that is flagging, but they fail to mention that the majority of those jobs and those workers will be shipped in from other nuclear projects. They will do their work and they will be moved on when they're no longer needed. Because with one hand they giveth, the other hand they taketh away. They claim lower bills for an area of these islands that has the highest per watt cost of electricity anyway. but fails to mention that further funding will likely probably have to come from an RAB, a regulated asset base of funding, basically a tax on the bills of local people, because with one hand they give it, the other hand they take it away. Now, I might sound flippant and sarcastic discussing some of this. That's partially because I have to be. Wales is already a net energy exporter, whose coasts and mountains, not under our control, but that of the royal families, already play host to multitudes of wind turbines, river barrages, and fields of solar panels. So this is not to benefit those who, when we were in the EU, lived in one of the most deprived areas of the continent. Neither is it really to benefit the people of the other people of these islands, a consolation prize we'd happily accept. Instead, this project will primarily serve those who have always benefited from the exploitation of Welsh resources, corporations and Whitehall. Corporations will benefit from massive influxes of public cash to feed their bottom line. They will benefit from the cultural and military industrial clout that this will gain them, which they can then use to get the next lot of public money, and that they will then also be able to upskill the nuclear engineers. Other corporations will be able to take advantage of this as well, with the announced new AI growth zone alongside with the Holyhead Freeport, two areas with now reduced regulations and reduced taxes. The government gets the ability to ensure that Wales is reliant on Westminster for at least the next 50 years, if not longer, and a new place to train those who will eventually work on their nuclear submarines, their reactors and their missiles. Those same engineers, by the way, that Rolls-Royce will be upskilling, because that dynamic is what is at the heart of this. The fluid barrier between military and civic nuclear projects. And that's why Rolls-Royce is familiar to us for another reason. They are the ones who develop and maintain the tech at the heart of our military nuclear capabilities. Now, before I begin accusing me of needing to wear a tinfoil hat for the last part of my contribution, the facts are clear, they're stated by the government and they're stated by Rolls-Royce themselves. They aren't even saying the quiet part out loud, they're saying the loud part out loud. In 2017, Rolls-Royce issued a dedicated report, marshalling the case for a revolutionary technology at the time, called small modular reactors, to, and I quote, relieve the Ministry of Defence of the burden of developing and retaining nuclear skills and capability. The then head of the MOD, a former nuclear lobbyist, said, we are completing the build of the nuclear submarines which will carry conventional weaponry. We have at some point to renew the warheads, so there is very definitely an opportunity here for the nation to grasp in terms of building up its nuclear skills. I do not think that is going to happen by accident. It's going to require concerted government action to make it happen. Concerted government action. Like, say, billions of pounds pumped into nuclear projects to keep them going. Before I spiral into the need to pull out some red strings and pictures of a pinboard, I will quickly move to another nuclear fantasy occurring in Wales before then summing up. Last Energy, a US nuclear venture capital firm, a phrase that keeps me awake at night, currently owns a site in South Wales, the old Llynvi coal power plant. But they are in the middle of trying to convert into a new SNMR site. The difference is, with this site, is that they claim at least is going to be entirely privately funded. They propose this site, this is a site that will essentially treat these reactors as, in their phrase, nuclear batteries. They will be installed in a site, and for 6 years, again, they will then, after 6 years, be, again using their words, unplugged and replaced. That spent reactor will then be stored underground on the site until the end of life of the site, which is roughly 4 years, if not longer. That would mean, if they are successfully getting this project going, that some reactors, from tested and experimental, would be buried for 44 years, while some reactors would still recently have been spent before moving away. How on earth can they say that the first lot of reactors will need 44 years before they're ready for transport and disposal, while the newest lot will be ready only 8 years after they are spent? Last Energy has spent months lobbying the government, the two governments, not to make them go through the normal regulation and approval process, claiming that it would threaten economic project viability. If even the lackluster approval process, if even the lackluster regulation and approval process the government proposes is too stringent for them, that says a hell of a lot regarding the potential risks for the site and the surrounding area. Nearly 1 million people within a 40-mile radius. Oh, by the way, those SNRs are slated to be built in the London Gateway port, so local CND groups, get your campaigning hats on.
Yeah.
Neither Wales nor Britain needs nuclear. An island with a fifth of the tidal, wind and solar generating capacity of Europe does not need nuclear. We must oppose these plans and whatever scheme they can cop next. If you're about workers' rights, if you care about energy independence, if you care about climate crisis, if you care about environmental safety and biodiversity, if you care about nuclear weapons and disarmament, if you're an internationalist, a socialist, or just someone who wants to leave a better world to the next generation, you would oppose nuclear power and you would oppose nuclear weapons. And you would join us in campaigning against these terrible plans. Diolch am wrando, solidarity. Solidarity. Thank you, please.
Thank you, Dylan. That was a really fascinating sort of explanation of what's going on in Wales, but linking it to the wider struggles as well. So thank you, Bill. So I hope this panel has given some sort of idea about how wide the nuclear network extends, and that's just in the UK. And obviously, other sites were referenced on the screen. There's people in this room from other parts of the UK which hosts parts of it. And I think in the time we've got left, we'd like to make it into more of a conversation, inviting contributions from the audience. Sort of, if you've got direct questions to any of our panel, please feel free to do that. And also to the panel, I don't think I'm going to come back for summing up. So if you've got anything you want to bring into the discussion, if you could indicate as well. But maybe if we could sort of build on your thoughts on how we bring all this together, how we bring what's happening across the country into the campaign, into our combined and individual campaigns. Those kinds of contributions would be welcomed. So we'll open the floor. Mark's going to come around with the microphone. Thank you, Mark. And I think we'll go to Maura first. Speaking from another part of the UK affected by this vicious system.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yes, I'm from Derby C&D. Am I on?
Yeah.
Yeah. Derby C&D. And so much of what all of you said, but particularly the last two, is so relevant to us. I remember, I can't remember what the film was, but I was standing alongside some members of Unite the Union from Rolls-Royce. And they were so excited that they were, well, excited is a bit over the top, but they were so pleased they were going to be involved in developing these, the sea things,
Submarine.
No, the tidal barrages.
Right, yes.
Right, I'm so sorry, my brain, I'm a long woman. So they were really, really excited about this. However, very shortly afterwards, we found they weren't going to be doing this. And instead, well, some of them had actually come to a CND meeting and were explaining their role, because we used to have demos outside the Rolls-Royce Rainsway base. And then, of course, jobs, they worked out how many jobs they were going to get, and we lost it all because they thought they were going to be the ones to do these SMRs. But you just said they were going to be elsewhere now. So we haven't even got the jobs for that. Yeah. Sorry, I'm rambling.
No, yeah, broken promises. I think that's probably another part of the nuclear cycle that affects communities every day. Who else would like to come in? Yes, Carol. Carol, I think there was a challenge for London C&D in one of the speeches. Are you accepting?
Actually, I'm Carol and I'm from London, as you pick up. I just want to ask a question of my own, if I may, of all the four panelists. Do you have youth and student CNG groups? And if so, can you tell us something about it? We've got some of the new, the next generation of campaigners, and it's very difficult to reach people in the universities, even more difficult to reach them in the schools. So any experience that you have is very, very welcome.
Okay, I'm going to get assistance with this one. We're working on it, and I'll let Samuel speak. I'm going to introduce Samuel Raphael-Williams, who's our campaign and communication organizer, and he's working on it with me.
Hello, thanks for a great session. Thanks to all the panelists, and especially the organisers as well. We're working on developing a youth platform as part of Scottish CND. There are questions, we've just had our AGM and we have a new executive committee that is onboarding, but this is something that we're working on presenting to them within the next 2 weeks with the intention of launching it in the new year. I personally have some ideas that will be part of that presentation about getting young people involved on a hands-on basis, a very hands-on basis, because so much campaigning, political communication is mediatized nowadays. I think it's very, very important to get people meeting in person. I think that part of that, in a perhaps ironic way, might be media production skills. Because I think it's very, very essential, not only that we inform, as you say, inform and educate a new generation, but that we teach them how to communicate. It's not a natural or obvious thing. And so much of us, are overwhelmed with the amount of media content that there is out there. I believe that the notion of learning how to make it yourself can be quite empowering. So, but that's just some ideas I'm planning to present to the executive, and it will be, hopefully, we will have a Scottish nuclear disarmament youth platform launched in 2026. Keep an eye on it.
Just say, so, thanks, Sandra. That's really interesting, particularly the last part of what you said. Perhaps London CND could get in touch with you and pitch your ideas. We are doing something which I think is exciting, which is we've started podcasts. I think this is the medium of the future. And we've got a couple of young people who've been doing it. We're not very skilled. We're not like a sort of BBC newscast presenters or whatever. But we do a reasonable job and we get some really good guests in. And maybe we can sort of offer you that in exchange for picking your brains. I hope the same would go as well for Cullen.
I was going to just jump on that very quickly to discuss. So I'm 24, so I am youth and student CND candidate, as jokingly I like to say. But we are doing a lot of work in developing young people, because while they are the future, they are also the present, as I like to say.
They've done a good job on you.
But I started working with CND when I was 21. I've been supporting the campaign since I was about 15. So, but I was just going to jump in very quickly in some of the stuff we've done previously. CND campaign became quite known maybe 2 years ago for our ability to do some marches, and we did like marches from like Transfynydd to Wilver. We did one from Transfynydd to somewhere else, and then we did one from Transfynydd to Medi and the Eisteddfod, which is a Welsh cultural festival. And that is something that really did develop young people and get young people involved, because, well, frankly, it's a hell of a walk. It's basically only young people that can do these days. So that was something we did, and what we found there was actually, what was one of the things that were appealing about that was the disconnect from the sort of environment in which young people live these days. It wasn't that it was all social media, and it was that it was sort of just the traditional stuff of, marching and speaking to the people. But then on the flip side of that, there's been some work done on the skills development, especially around the tech side of things. That's something I've been trying to work on a bit. It's not really been successful so far because there's so many other things taking up the political time and consciousness of people, which is very fair. But one thing that we are doing that I think it's maybe not a model, but it sort of works particularly in Wales, because Wales is a weird place, is that we're doing a lot of really important cross-group work. So we launched a project called Heddwch Wife, Peace Action Wales. That had another young person who was leading that work. And that was all about communicating militarism, communicating all this stuff. And we got something like 50 or 60 young people involved in various groups and workshops in that. And some of them are still with us and still doing work. A lot of it's now currently dedicated to Palestine and communicating with the genocide, because obviously, but it's all feeding back into that same thing of cross-group work that I think has been really important, is that to a degree, we've put our initialisms aside. You know, we are CNT Cymru, they are PSC Cymru. But I was going to say something really cringe then, which is the way that actually we're all Cymru, but that is cringe. But actually, we are all the same people doing the same work, and we all have our own way of doing it. But the fundamental thing is to come together, realise our common struggle, and fight on that.
Thank you. So are you able to go to universities?
Sorry?
Are you able to go to universities?
We try our best. So there's 4 universities in Wales. Sorry, to be very quick. There's 4 universities in Wales. We've managed to have presences at all of them in the previous 3 years, not all at the same time. 2 particularly notable examples I'll give is that we were really involved in the Swansea divestment campaign, which got Swansea to divest £5 million from complicit industries. And a particular action that I was involved in Bristol that I liked was we had BEA systems and the army recruiting on campus, and we hung a banner over them that said warmongers and murderers, so nobody would speak to them. It was very subtle, but it worked because nobody then wants to be seen under a banner that says warmongers and murderers. So sometimes there is that sort of direct action thing. But again, I think young people are really sort of keen on right now. It's actually, we realise that we need to do direct action. We can develop young people's skills in doing that and the ability to sort of do that in a way that skirts the law but doesn't necessarily put you in massive danger, if that makes sense.
I just wanted to say something about universities in general, and I've only experienced of 2, mainly London University and Southampton University, but I think it's quite widely the case that university places are going so more and more for students from rich families in other countries to come here. And of course they have visas to be here, and they can't join in anything like this. So the pool of students available to contact is smaller, I think, than it used to be.
I agree.
I would add to that. I managed to get a 3rd meeting this semester of 6 students in Plymouth University to discuss the nuclear issues. So Plymouth University is is probably the major marine research, but it's also that trains the nuclear engineers. So you cannot be anti-nuclear at Plymouth University. And as I say, the Babcock insignia logo is everywhere. But the discussion is very much, we are taught all the time that nuclear is the answer to the climate crisis, and that we need nuclear. And it is very, very important for the students to understand, as the penny drops, that there is a nuclear industry. There is not 2 nuclear industries, there is 1 nuclear industry. And the people who are being trained for nuclear power are being trained into Aldermaston and into the nuclear weapons industry itself. And it's a 2-way, but actually the majority of the money is in the nuclear weapons. So they come in and they start to develop, to learn, and all they want is the certificate. They come in for a job. Now I say this because I'm a member of the UCU, the University and College Union, Trade Union, ex-lecturer, blah, blah. And really, UCU has come on board with CND fairly recently. And it offers an opportunity for everyone in this room, for the local groups, to get in touch with the UCU branch locally and start to discuss this, because there has to be a message from the staff to the students to say, at least you should inquire. Remember education as opposed to training? At least you should inquire about the pros and cons of nuclear and what the alternatives are. And we've got to push that very strongly through the training.
Thanks, Tony. This might be a good time to give a shout out to C&D Peace Education, with Helen sitting there on the corner who runs our programme. Thanks, Helen. It's a very, very valuable tool which teaches critical thinking in schools, which I think, from conversations I've had with many teaching trade unions, is something that's missing from a lot of the curriculum these days. So if you're interested in getting involved in C&D's peace education work, please speak to Helen. And picking up on what Tony said about trade unions, C&D handed in a letter to Keir Starmer last week at Downing Street, opposing what Di was talking about, which is the expansion of Britain's nuclear weapon system to an airborne system. And I think it was 8 trade union general secretaries that signed on to that. That is a huge number, representing a lot of workers. So that could be another idea for building on local campaigning, to make sure that you're in touch with all those unions at a regional and local basis. And if you can organise actions for them to talk to the workers directly, or to protest, or to talk about divestment, which is another issue that we should be spending more resources on. We need longer days and longer years, don't we? Does anyone in the room want to build on that, about good examples of campaigning and how we can get people more engaged in our communities? Lynn?
Sorry, no, not really. I just wanted to make a link with Tony, though, over Rosyth, because actually we've never mentioned Rosyth. It's not on that map. I don't know why it wasn't on that map. But Rosyth Nuclear Dockyard is also a Babcock domain, and it also has nuclear hulks leaching radioactivity and threatening local population. And it's also, because of climate change, one of the many dockyard type places that will eventually be flooded. So, you know, we maybe should be doing a joint thing around that. So I think joint actions, linking up, is more important than ever. You know, we need the coalition, like going to people in planet groups in universities, rather than expecting them to come to us, going to people where we can, but also building our strengths, you know, by making local campaigns that are joining up across maybe the boundaries of the nations of this place, UK.
Yeah, can I just 2 sentences, because CND led the stop of the dump. Some of you might still have the placards in Plymouth, and just it's a good ending because we won. What that was is that those hulks of submarines, like in Rosyth, were going to be sawn up on site. And you might not believe it, but they were going to saw up the metal that is, of course, completely contaminated, radioactive, you know, and the stuff around the core, what was the nuclear core, that's all going up to Sophie, yeah, which is, of course, falling apart because it's overburdened and is leaking everywhere. It's into Wales particularly, yeah. And the rest of it was going to be a new factory on the site and sawn up, and then sent to Denmark and Finland to be made into white goods, washing machines and fridges. You do get what I'm saying, don't you? And we had, we had a 10-year campaign, but we had a 5-year major campaign. We had 2 demonstrations of over 1,000 local people. We got the unions involved. CND led it. We formed a coalition to get other movements on board. And we won, which is why we're blamed for the fact that there's now 14 submarines bobbing at anchor, because literally they do not know what to do with them. Does that make sense? They have no plan about how you decommission a nuclear submarine. So I just think that's worth putting in. But you know, you can have a campaign and you can win. But of course, once nuclear's there, nuclear's forever. So it's better just not to make it, isn't it?
Thanks, Tony. And I think I might add in another win, because we definitely need them, don't we? So until September, the TUC's official policy was to support increase in military spending, jobs in military, and led by UCU, actually, who Tony just referenced. A motion was adopted, wages not weapons motion is what it was called. Everyone was in wages not weapons t-shirts around the TUC Congress Hall, And it was a very heated debate about whether the TUC, the trade union as a movement, should support the concept of prioritising non-military jobs. And it was a victory. It was tense, but it was great, you know. It's the trade union movement as a whole in this country now supports wages, not weapons, as they said themselves, prioritising non-military jobs over military jobs. So let's take our victories when we can, and let's learn from each other. And I hope that's what we've sort of started, that we sort of got from this panel. If we realised how vast that network is, that it affects so many communities, not just the obvious ones we think of. It affects communities and people all across the UK and obviously internationally as well. And I think what I hope we've kind of picked up as well is that we can contact each other. We do have different expertise. You know, I'm sure Samuel wouldn't mind London C&D contacting him or any other group across the country. Contact Wales, offer your own expertise, what you're good at and what you want to share. You can make direct contact or you can come via me and I can put you in touch. Email the easiest is information@cnduk.org. So I just need to do a bit of help, sorry.
Can I just make a brief comment?
Yes.
I used to belong to a hippie commune in Galloway called the Estate of Hope and Kindness. And British Nuclear Fuels wanted to dump some of their nuclear waste into Galloway Hills. And we didn't like the idea. Neither did the public, but even the planning authorities didn't want it, so they took it to appeal. And we had a lawyer called William McRae, some of you may know him, possibly, who represented us. There was us gang of hippies and William McRae against British Nuclear Fuels at the inquiry in their town hall, and we won.
Yes.
There is an unfortunate end, because many years later, William McRae was driving home and called his wife to say, "I'm on my way home from Medi, dear." The next thing, his car was found 100 yards off the road, and he had a bullet through the back of his head.
No, really?
And he'd been followed by Special Branch a few weeks before. I think there's a film in that.
There's a story to end with.
Yeah.
Just a quick thing to say that if this project at Marham with these weapons and these planes gets off the ground, literally, it's not the end, because at Greenham when we started, we didn't know what the end was. Polaris, Cruise Watch didn't know what the end would be. Polaris Watch didn't know what the end would be. Sea Action didn't know what the end would be. So we need to get started and we need to stick in there for the long run, and we might make it.
Yeah.
Thank you. And you just led me perfectly to my next sentence, which is that we are now drawing this panel to an end. There's just a final plenary to come, and that is exactly on what you were saying. It's on the way ahead, specifically in the campaign against British nuclear expansion, which is the purchase of these F-35 fighter jets to be based at Marham. So I hope you can stick around for the next 90 minutes, where we'll be really keeping it focused on what's coming up for CND, for other organisations. How do we move forward on the anti-nuclear campaign? A couple of other things. There's a CND stall in the room. Please free to take as much material as you like or ask us questions about the campaign. We have a demonstration at Marham actually on February 28th. There is a coach going from London, all of which you can get information about on the stall. Please come. There was also the Scottish March, 14th of March, if you fancy going up to Faz Lane. As I said, I think it's a very important experience for anti-nuclear campaigners to visit. And then finally, a plug for our social media. If you're not following us on Instagram, why not? So join us at @CND_UK. Thank you so much for your attention today. It's a really good day. Good to have all these discussions. So thanks very much.
Thank you.
local authorities were asking.
That's very good. Especially at the end. So you think you're already at 40?
Let's go. Probably because that will reveal. It's always what it is. Toby's first.
I think it's good that you got that message at the end. You take the long run. We're going to get
That's the guy class.
Yeah.
Last week, the Russians were saying that we were their worst enemy. Not America, but yes, it's not much fun, is it? Who wants it to do a phone call? Well, I mostly read Radio 4 and World News is a night. Yes. Which of them came up with that remark?
I went to Sabby. Did you? Yeah. Did you? How do you know the uni there? Oh, you're. Oh, cool. Fair enough. I love it, sorry, yeah. Mathematics in the late 90s. Yeah.
Thank you, Lynn.
I thought this was the programme for the 1st of November. I just thought it might be I thought you might want to have one. That's the one. We circulated that.
I haven't got that. I'm on the mailing list. I try and be for all the different Scottish C&D bits, but I don't get these. So thank you.
So that
all the local group.
Yeah, well, we sent it round with it came round with the council. We sent the PDF version to the council, but I thought you might want a printed one. And in a way, we should have sent this programme with it, because this had to be printed in time to get to print before the AGM, so it had to be printed before this. So, so they kind of go together.
Yeah, thanks, Lynn. I like knowing what everyone's doing. You get ideas.
Well, it's good too. It's just good to know, isn't it? Yeah. Thanks for today. I'm sorry I didn't do a. I realised that Tony was going to do PowerPoint and speak for a little bit longer. I might have done the same, but anyway, I was very anxious about keeping to time.
Well, yeah, when I speak, I'm so like, oh, you've told me 7 minutes.
I know, so that's
what
what I was trying to do.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's why.
Especially anyone who might be
Have you got a charge out there? Oh, if you need that back, you can take it. Sure. Yeah. I've got enough back.
So say one person grabs it and everyone puts their own label on it, and then it's so we can get more of that. So with this, I'm making
It's a 360 camera, so do a little time lapse. The Insta 360 X5. Yeah. You're automating it. That, I mean, yeah, well, I was set for a time lapse, right? You can do all sorts of I can connect it to my phone. It's an actual space. It's the whole thing, right?
So we've got a lot of content from today. Yeah. Live stream, we're on YouTube live. Yeah. Right. I need to. It's not all black.
Oh, I see.
I use them at the Palestine one. Oh, this was something Chinese set one, set up over there. Very good. It's cool. You get a cool shot of it. Yeah.
And of course, I mean, here's a telegraph reader. We might be interested. I mean, if we didn't buy all this stuff,
We use it then. Well, I just
yeah, I read all the stuff. It's a very good fun cover. There wasn't very much on the
You were very good. You will never know.
Really? So I didn't know the link actually. Haven't let anyone down.
Video will prove it.
Even though I sort of work on your weapons every day, you just pick up new things. This is your chair. We got everything you need. Are you not doing it? Some people have been landing it on me without pre-warning. You won't go ahead in the wrong format.
I mean, if I'm going to do a PowerPoint, I have like a minute I put it on memory sticks in there.
That is me. So someone just walks into a conference, two minutes full of you to speak, and you go, can I show this? Everybody get it?
Okay, well, I just know that was
You don't have to come and just say as anybody wants to, so unless there's something directly to do.
yeah.
And then at the very end, again, you don't have to take it very long to give you a chance to say
How are you? I'm okay, I'm fine, yes. A bit over work, like everybody is probably, you know.
How are you doing?
Good to see you.
Yeah, you're going to come tomorrow?
Yes, yeah. I'll see you tomorrow.
Are you doing tomorrow?
I'm speaking in the panel on fashion on
Monday.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah. What for? For the yeah, no, it's good.
Can folks start taking their seats, please?
That's really, I thought it was really good.
Yeah, I don't know.
Can folks start taking their seats, please? Sit down, please. You're right. All right.
I believe it. I totally believe it. It's all right. Don't worry. Don't worry. Are you?
Hello.
Okay. All right. See you now.
Hello. That's the kind of tone for this session. Okay, can folks start settling down, please? And those who are talking, can you not? Good afternoon, friends and comrades. And, you know, because it's like a final kind of rally type session, that's the kind of thing that we need. So when these brilliant set of speakers get up and do their thing, we want to have some energy in the room. I know it's the last session, but, you know, I mean, it's been a good day, yes? Yeah. Right, so it needs to be reflected in this session as well.
My name is Roger Mackenzie, and I'm one of the vice presidents of CND. Great honour. It's the first time that's ever happened. Anyway, that's fine, that's good. We can try again. I'm Roger Mackenzie, vice president of CND. Thank you all for coming along today. Thank you all for participating in what I think has been a really good day, yes? But none of it really kind of works unless we really start to think about what comes next. So how can we really take some of the things that we've talked about today out into communities, out into workplaces, out into unions? How can we really do that? How can we build on the excellent work that's already taking place across the country? And that is really what this session is all about. We have a brilliant panel who are going to guide us through some of those questions. So we have, I'm going to just introduce them as I go along rather than do a whole thing at the beginning. But remember that energy thing that we talked about? So for every single one, you have to show that kind of energy. I will say this before I introduce the first of our brilliant speakers, is that I think we're in a really pivotal moment where it's not just about a war that might start sometime because there's too many governments running around saying that we're on the verge of a war. But I think there's something more positive going on as well, and that is there's a lot of people who are crying out for peace, who are really looking for that leadership about what we can do to bring about a peaceful world where peace isn't just something we do in between wars, but it's something that we do as people. And I think there's a lot of that around at the moment. And what we are trying to do at CND is to really try and crystallise some of that. But we don't do that alone. We do that in partnership with other peace organisations as well. And that was a remarkably kind of smooth way of introducing our first speaker, who is Lindsay German, the convener of Stop the War.
Well, thank you very much, Roger. And it's a powerful microphone. Thank you very much, and thanks to CND for inviting me today. It sounds like you've had a brilliant day, and I hope I don't say things, well, actually, I'm sure I will say things that other people have said today, but I hope it's not too repetitive. Because as Roger said, and as I think, we're all aware, and this is why we're here today, the world's probably a more dangerous place than at any time, I'd say, getting on for since the Second World War. I mean, you can argue about the various flashpoints in the post-war world, but pretty much we are now in a situation which, certainly for somebody of my generation, I don't think we would have believed was possible if we thought about it 10 or 20 years ago, that we would have thought, that we grew up in a period where people had been through major wars, who'd been, I was brought up by people, been involved in the Second World War, and so were all the kids down my street, everybody, when it was a sunny day, the dads used to get out their khaki shorts, because in those days you didn't go to Primark, and they'd all been in some sort of battle around the world, and they'd been prisoners of war. So people were very, very aware of what war meant and what it meant. Indeed, my primary school had air raid shelters in it at the time, so people knew that, and they also knew, because this was becoming more and more current for people, that the threat of nuclear war was very, very real. So therefore, the Cuban Missile Crisis and all these things, these were things that people were really, really frightened about. And I think one of the difficult things that we have today is that nuclear war, and most conventional war, is talked about in such, I'd say ridiculous, but that makes it sound too sort of flippant. It's talked about in such a way that people do not understand the horrors of war. And of course, this is very deliberate. If you look at Israel and Palestine, for example, I think it's still the case, it certainly was the case till a couple of weeks ago, that no Western media, no foreign media is allowed into the Gaza Strip to see the horror that has been carried out. If you look at Ukraine actually what you're getting is embedded journalists who tell you what the army and what NATO and indeed what the Russians want them to know. That's the truth. You're not getting honest war reporting. I heard Don Cullen on the radio the other week, who's now in his 90s, very famous war photographer, particularly around Vietnam. He said, I couldn't do it now. He said, too dangerous with the weapons that they've got, but also you couldn't do it for a whole number of other reasons. You're not allowed anywhere near, and it's completely, talk about the fog of war and the way that war is portrayed in the media, the way the Second World War is talked about more now, probably than at any time since the Second World War, ridiculously, because it's a completely different thing. So these, I think, are some of the questions that we've got. And one of the things is obviously how we make people aware of what war is really about. And we've got this weekend, the talks about the peace proposals coming from Donald Trump and from the Russians over Ukraine. Now, isn't it an amazing thing that you've got the peace proposals that Donald Trump did in Gaza, which were on one page of paper, so on the back of a fag packet, basically, and involves partition, involves still arming Israel, involves putting the Palestinians more and more on the fringes of Gaza and not redeveloping the part that they are in. Now, with the peace proposal that I've seen around Ukraine, whether that's actually how it's going to turn out, whether it's going to be near that, it's got 28 points, so that's an improvement on the Gaza one. But actually it's done, of course, without real thought about what it means to the working class people of Ukraine or of Russia. And it's just worth remembering, very much while I want there to be peace in Ukraine, I think the war should end straight away, it shouldn't be at the expense of those people. It shouldn't be about the great powers deciding which bits of country are going to be in which, whether they're going to be in the Russian thing, whether they're going to be in the demilitarized zone, whether they're going to be any of these things. It's estimated, Trump's estimate is 1 million Russians have died in the last 4 years in this war. His estimate is that 700,000 Ukrainians have died. Now that's nearly 2 million people. And if you look at what Russia has got in terms of territory, it's 12% of Ukraine if you don't count what already, for example, if you don't count Crimea, which was a totally much earlier thing. So people are dying in a war which is like the Iran-Iraq war of the 80s, or it's like the war of attrition of the First World War. Terrible, terrible casualties, and really quite remarkable casualties in all sorts of ways. And what I feel there is with both of these, this will be decided by the NATO powers who don't like what Trump is doing, but are frightened of Trump at the same time. So there will be some sort of settlement which doesn't benefit most people. You notice that Trump is going to use frozen Russian assets to rebuild Ukraine, but 50% of the profits from that rebuilding will go, guess where? Not to the Ukrainians, not to the Russians, but to the United States of America. That's the way that it's going. So you've got that going on. You've also got in Europe this massive instability being caused by the war. The growth of the far right, I think you have to, which is across Europe, including in this country, I think you have to attribute at least some of that to the war in Ukraine and the conflict that has arisen there. And by the way, if you want to talk about where fascism is growing and is strong and is militarized, I'm afraid to say it is in Ukraine as well. So those are issues for us, but also instability over politics, but also instability over economics, because when you look at what is happening, the EU announced the other week they want a 130 billion euro fund for even more military spending. Every country is upping its military spending. We know it with Britain, but Germany is doubling its military spending over the next 5 years. And all of this is at the expense of working people, people who can't get health services working properly, can't get education, can't get housing, can't get any of the things that all this money could be spent on. And guess what? When the peace plan between Trump and Russia was announced a couple of days ago, guess whose shares fell as a result of that? The arms companies. That's what happens when they think war might be coming to an end and they won't be able to make the absolutely record eye-watering profits that all the big European and American firms have made over the last few years. So all of those are concerns for us. And I think what's very important is that we talk about three things that we continue to campaign on. One is the question of Palestine, which we shouldn't. We've been involved in this for the last more than 2 years now. There is no sign, really, there's a ceasefire, but there's no sign that it's getting any better for the Palestinian people. In fact, it's getting worse in all sorts of ways. So that is important for us. But also, I think we have to be able to take the Palestine movement into the other movements that are important for us. I mean, I fear very much the growth of Islamophobia in this country. When we set up Stop the War nearly a quarter of a century ago, that was one of our main slogans, against Islamophobia, because we knew these wars would lead to more racism against Muslims. I would not have imagined 24 years ago how bad this was. I wouldn't have imagined the way that asylum seekers are being treated. I wouldn't have imagined the way that reforms policies are really the policies that everybody, all the mainstream parties really relate to. And that is something which I think is a very, very frightening thing. And I think that the question of the TUC, which people were talking about in the last session in here, I know, the TUC resolution about welfare, not warfare, about wages, not weapons, I think has to be at the centre of our political campaigning. We've got to win more and more Labour MPs to this, and we've got to do it as quickly as we possibly can, because it is going to create massive divisions in this country, and there will be a massive drive to war with conscription and all the other things that we've been talking about. Final point is, there was a peace conference in Paris at the beginning of October where 4,000 people turned up, mainly from Europe. We are doing that again in June the 20th. Please put the date in your diaries. We've got Central Hall booked, which costs an absolute fortune, so any donations anyone can make will be very gratefully received. But the crucial thing is, we are going to try and get, the French have said they're going to send 500 people, so we need to get 500 people, or 600 given we're in Britain. We want to get people from across Europe to say, the people of Europe say no to war. They say no to arms spending. They say no to all those things. These are the messages I think we've got to get across. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Lindsay. Now, the good news is I'm not going to give the notes as speeches in between speeches, right? So, you can if you really want to. No, I won't. Look, it's a great honour to be able to invite our next speaker, long-time friend and comrade of mine, Mikaela Tracy Ramos, who's on the National Executive Committee of Unison, the country's biggest union.
Thanks, Roger, for that introduction, and thanks, CND, for inviting me to speak here today. Like Roger said, I'm from Unison, and we represent public service workers, 1.3 million members. And I am proud to be from a union that has such a long-standing commitment to peace and against nuclear weapons. In 2016, our union said that there is no justification for renewing Trident nuclear weapons, especially at a time when public services were under such huge strain. The British economy needs real investment in public services, not years of cuts, and certainly not a nuclear weapon system designed for the Cold War era. Instead, the government should be investing in our schools, hospitals, and social care system. Now, this statement from 2016 still rings true today. Our policy, passed at our national delegate conferences over the past few years, strongly opposed the government's proposals to ramp up military spending from 2.3% to 2.5% of the national income by 2027, and has made the link between the decision by the government to increase military expenditure at a time at the expense of our public services. So I'm proud that Unison were involved in the TUC's historic win, where the TUC rejected the increase in defence spending and militarisation. Building upon our long-standing policy, this cemented our position: wages, not weapons. With us supporting this motion alongside the majority of TUC affiliates, This made a right to the wrongs of the policy that was passed in 2022 in favour of increased military expenditure, and put our labour movement at the forefront of fighting for peace. As well as all the hard work happening within the trade union movement and building the movement for peace, I want to pay tribute to the RMT and CND and all of those that were involved in the alternative defence review. I think there's some copies around that you can pick up, as it's so pivotal in challenging the dominant war narrative and offered an alternative vision for peace, justice and security. The production of the Alternative Defence Review gave us the basis to challenge the myths around militarisation and jobs, and examine closer how militarisation has distorted our national priorities, fuels global insecurity instead of protecting us, and divert spending from public services and our much needed social infrastructure. It exposed it as economically inefficient, exposed military expenditure as economically inefficient, environmentally destructive, and ultimately how it has stifled a more sustainable and just economy. The type of economy that our labour movement and the working class in Britain so desperately need. So I believe that mainstreaming this document is critical in building the peace movement in the labour movement and beyond. Firstly, like I said, we need to mainstream the document. As I've outlined before, it gives us the basis of challenging the mainstream narrative around war and offering working class people an alternative. And this is something that I believe we can unite around in the labour movement if used effectively. I represent young workers on the national executive of Unison, and for the past few years, we have been working hard to develop this understanding of militarisation and its dangers in the youth section of the union. Next week, we have our National Young Members Conference that has over 120 delegates from across Britain and the north of Ireland. We have on the agenda 3 motions in favour of welfare, not warfare, and against the drive to war for our futures. I am proud that one of these motions includes a call to disseminate the Alternative Defence Review widely amongst over the 100,000 young workers that we have in Unison. This is what we must be doing across the trade union movement and our communities to get the truth and alternative out there. And I genuinely believe that the Alternative Defence Review is a strong basis for rebuilding our strong peace tradition amongst organised labour. When the Labour government was first elected last year, Keir Starmer's first act as Prime Minister was to attend a NATO summit in Washington to assure the US that Labour were quite happy to continue to support US imperialism and militarism across the globe. Since then, with Labour's complicity and active involvement in the Israeli war machine and the Israeli war against the Palestinian people and continued drive to war in Ukraine, they have solidified their place as the party of war. The government have proudly said, this is the highest sustained increase in defence spending since the Cold War. This shows that this Labour Party is getting this country on a war economy with plans to boost the so-called national security spending to 5% by 2035. In the government's own words, Britain is moving to a war-fighting readiness to deter threats and strengthen the Euro-Atlantic security of the Euro-Atlantic. As the UK steps up to take on more responsibility for European security, we must have a NATO-first defence policy and lead. But what does this NATO-first policy actually mean? It means lining the pockets of arms companies and not investing in the youth and public services of our country. It means the UK-Germany defence agreement, which is aimed to strengthen the east flank of NATO by the so-called land deterrence, but actually means us spending £1 million of public money to get their foot in the door of buying German weapons and vehicles to use in war, instead of investing in well-paid jobs for young people. It means continued complicity in the war and genocide against the Palestinian people, as Britain's involvement in the EU and NATO's military partnership is responsible for facilitating this. Young people across Britain have been mobilising against the genocide in Gaza at unprecedented rates, and the Labour government's increase in militarisation has brought home to us the dire consequences of war. One thing is certain, it's becoming clearer that this drive to increase arms production across Britain and Europe will be used to kill innocent children, men and women in the name of the Labour Party's commitment to NATO, which Sara describes as the bedrock of our security, but in reality leads us to a cycle of forever wars. With the current job market being decimated and young people being forced to accept low-paid, insecure work, the government's argument for well-paid jobs could be seductive for Britain's youth. However, as I've outlined above, this argument is not only wrong, but it's a lie to justify the government's arms race in which we all end up losing. So whilst the government is sucking the life out of our public services and cutting welfare in favour of war, our response as young trade unionists is clear. We robustly oppose this government's drive to war and increase arms production, and we must fight for a renewed peace dividend of social programmes for the sake of all of our futures. Britain's youth need investment and well-paid jobs, not bombs. Germany last week agreed a plan to conscript young people to the army in order to be on a war footing. Earlier this year, German Defence Chief warned how the Western NATO alliance had to prepare for a possible Russian attack within 4 years. How absurd is that? Compulsory enlistment could be considered by the German government. This is, of course, deeply unpopular with the German youth who have been fighting to oppose this new measure. But looking to Europe, are we that far away from a similar situation in Britain? We have to organise these young people who have been mobilising against the genocide of Gaza and get them organised against the war drive in Britain. As young workers, we must, as a priority, expose this political system for what it is, callous in pursuit of imperialist wars for profit. The increased militarism of this government can be summed up in the quote from Harry Mackle's book Imperialism, From the Colonial Age to Present. Imperialism necessarily involves militarism. Indeed, they are twins that have fed on each other in the past as they do now. It's clear that the youth of this country do not benefit from this government's drive to war, which benefits to arms dealers and capital. So for the sake of our futures, trade unions must lead from the front, oppose all increases in military expenditure and wars. We must continue to demand an end to the military-industrial complex and for a truly independent foreign policy which has peace and social justice at its centre. We must continue to raise the cause of peace in the Labour movement and its understanding of imperialism and war, and call for investments in our services and youth. And we must mainstream the alternative defence review. We have to fight for a world in which all people can live in peace, human dignity and justice prevails. So instead of NATO first, instead of war first, how about the working class and the youth of Britain first? The future is ours to win, so we have to struggle for it. Thank you, comrades.
I'll tell you what, it's not just that the future of the trade union movement's in good hands, the present of the trade union movement is in good hands as well. Yes? Brilliant, thank you. And I'm sure all of us in this room back in March were disgusted when the Quakers were raided by the police.
That was appalling.
They're not the only people to have been raided by the police, but there's something particularly disgusting, frankly, when a load of young people were sitting at meeting and talking about peace, that they get raided for doing that. So I think it's great that we've got Grace DaCosta from Quakers in Britain with us today. Please give Grace a massive welcome.
Thank you very much. Friends, peaceful protest has shaped the course of history, yet today it's being treated like a crime. Our fellow campaigners are being put in prison and threatened with deportation for doing no more than peacefully exercising their human rights. The right to protest is how ordinary people make their views known between elections in our democracy. It's a vital part of how we campaign for the things that matter most to us and the world, including peace and climate justice. It's especially important for people whose voices wouldn't otherwise be heard, including those from racial and religious minorities. Restrictions on protest have a disproportionate negative impact on those groups. As you said, I'm here today on behalf of Quakers in Britain, which is a faith group grounded in the values of peace, equality, truth, and sustainability. And these values lead us to work for democracy and human rights. The right to protest matters to Quakers because we're called to listen for the will of God and follow it with our words and actions. Many Quakers take part in non-violent protests and host non-violent protest groups in their meeting houses. As you said, in March of this year, Metropolitan Police raided Westminster Quaker Meeting House and arrested 6 young people who were planning a non-violent protest. And dozens of Quakers have been arrested this year for non-violent protests on climate justice and Palestine. Politicians talk about keeping the public safe from protesters. But on the flip side, it doesn't feel very safe to be a member of the public taking part in a protest right now. And I've no doubt some of you here feel this more acutely than I do. It's not so much an erosion of our human rights, more of a landslide. The recent changes started with the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Act 2022, which broadened the scenarios where police can put restrictions on protest and raise the penalties for some offences. I was on the steering group of the Police Bill Alliance, which campaigned against these sections of the Act. We were so happy that we convinced the House of Lords to throw out some of the most terrible parts of that bill. But then, of course, the government brought them back in the Public Order Act 2023. This act brought in a load of new criminal offences, including locking on and being equipped to lock on, which meant you now have the ridiculous situation of people being arrested for standing near a protest with a bike lock in their bag. Both of these acts expanded the definition of serious disruption to make it easier for police to claim it's going to happen, and broadened police powers to preempt disruption rather than proving it actually happened. And as if all of that under a Conservative government wasn't enough, we now have a Labour government trying to bring in more restrictions on protest in the Crime and Policing Bill. This bill would let police restrict protests that might go near places of worship, would stop people covering their faces at protests, and would take into account the cumulative impact of a protest when restricting it. And I don't need to tell you that cumulative impact is quite a big part of successful protest. So we all need to campaign against this bill as it goes through the House of Lords now and back to the Commons in the new year. Campaigning against these laws is especially important in the context of who our next government might be and what they could do with these powers in their hands. And these new restrictions on protest are happening against a broader backdrop of politicians speaking and acting in a way that undermines our human rights. Members of our government are deliberately conflating violent attacks on places of worship with peaceful protests. Now, clearly, these attacks are abhorrent, and we understand that many people from religious communities are scared and are demanding action to protect their people and their places of worship. But these attacks were not carried out by peaceful protesters, and restrictions on protests are not the answer to racial and religious hatred and violence. In fact, politicians are only sowing further division by claiming that they are. So what can we do about all of this? Firstly, I think it's important we get our messaging right. We need to talk about the importance of non-violent protest and encourage others to speak out in the ways that they still can. Keep your messaging positive and remind politicians and your fellow citizens of 3 important things. Firstly, that protest is a human right and a vital part of our democracy. It's protected by Articles 10 and 11 of the European Convention on Human Rights. Our freedom of expression, assembly and association can only be restricted if it's proportionate to do so to protect other rights. Secondly, protesters aren't some kind of subspecies of person. Any member of the public might want to protest at any point in their life. Protesters range from fracking nanas to taxi drivers, from Jews against genocide to Joanna Lumley. Human rights are needed for everyone. Thirdly, protest has led to so many positive changes in the history of our nation, and it's needed now more than ever. People who care about the future of our planet should be allowed to disrupt everyday life non-violently to drive change. In terms of actions, I think it's important we work together to campaign against the new measures in the Crime and Policing Bill, and this might involve writing to your MPs, signing petitions, sharing social media posts, writing to your local paper, and taking part in protests. Because protest restrictions have a disproportionate negative effect on minorities, it's important for those of us with privilege to reach out to these groups and their representative bodies to ask how we can support them locally and nationally. For example, Black Lives Matter and Migrants Organise. We need to carry on protesting and reminding people that it's legal to protest, but also be mindful that protesting and risking arrest might not be as safe for some people as it is for others. For example, depending on whether you're a British citizen or not. But my key takeaway from today, this amazing conference, has been that the movements for peace and climate justice and racial justice and workers' rights are coming together now more than ever, and together we are so strong. So to wrap up, protest is neither a privilege nor a nuisance. It's a cornerstone of our democracy and something we do have to campaign to protect. It's vital for all the issues we care about, and it affects every one of us. And I'll leave you with a sentence from the Quaker text, Advices and Queries, which I hope will inspire you. Take heed, dear friends, to the promptings of love and truth in your hearts. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Grace. Really positive message. I mean, just pulling out one of the things that I think kind of threads the first three contributions that we've had, and that's the importance of working together, how we need to bring these organisations together. So like all the work that's been done to bring all of these hundreds of thousands of people onto the streets all the time to campaign for the rights of the Palestinians, to campaign against genocide. How can we make sure that that goes across the piece? How can we link that to the campaigns for racial justice? How can we link that to the campaigns for migrant rights? How can we link that to the attacks that are taking place daily on a very local level against trade union rights as well? And I think that is so important for us. But also so important at the moment is the work that the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament is doing nationally and internationally as well. And there's no greater person, I think, who can pull all these threads together than our great General Secretary, Sophie.
First of all, just like thank you so much for coming here today. As I say, we all understand how serious the situation is and how high the stakes are and how important it is that we kind of unite together to challenge that. And I'm sure that we are all feeling, and very rightly so, that the world has been hurtling towards nuclear war. Nuclear states are modernising, they're increasing their nuclear weapons. Globally, spending on war and nuclear weapons last year went to $2.7 trillion. And that's the steepest year-on-year rise for the last 3 decades. And we can feel that, can't we? And Trump's statements about restarting explosive nuclear testing has been a wake-up call that a new nuclear arms race is real and it is happening now. The Ukraine war has become the most serious nuclear flashpoint since the height of the Cold War, with this terrifying nuclear brinksmanship between the US and Russia. And it has shown to a whole new generation of people why nuclear weapons do not keep us safe. why they cannot be part of any civilized so-called defense policy, because they are holding the entire world to ransom. The defense of Ukrainian people has been cynically used to justify the huge increases in military spending and to promote the use of nuclear weapons. Britain argues it's expanding its nuclear capability and buying these F-35A nuclear fighter jets to, I quote, boost national security. It is the height of nuclear hypocrisy that countries like Britain must have nuclear weapons for their security and indeed threaten to use them against countries without them. And yet, of course, these nuclear jets offer no protection for the British population. On the contrary, they increase the risk of nuclear weapons being used, and they make us all a target. And this is because these jets can launch the US so-called battlefield nuclear weapons that have been designed to be used against troops, against conventional weapons, not in retaliation against a nuclear attack. So they are aggressive, not defensive. And their destructive power is 3 times the size of the Hiroshima bomb that killed over 200,000 people. Now, the jets will be under NATO, not British command. And Trump determines where and when these bombs are deployed. So this is nothing, absolutely nothing to do with national security. It is the opposite of national security. It is all about fighting in Trump's global war. Now, I'm sure a lot of us are getting our heads around Trump's 28-point plan and what this means. On the one hand, surely, if this plan brings about an end to the horrific conflict, this is a step in the right direction. If it ends the threat of nuclear war, that is a very big step forward. The fact that the plan refers to extending nuclear arms control treaties between the US and Russia, the countries with the largest nuclear arsenals, is also very important, because these arms control treaties have pretty much all collapsed. But ultimately, this plan is backed by the threat of war and nuclear attack rather than securing peace. A central part of Trump's plan is Ukraine's so-called security guarantee. That is the huge levels of state resources and funding being harnessed for nuclear expansion and so-called war readiness. And as people, I'm sure, have been part of many of the discussions here today, especially in terms of education, we look at the role that the MOD is going to try and play in our education system. We can see how huge sections of our state resources and institutions are going to be harnessed for militarism. Now, European and British governments will continue to justify this deadly war drive and rearmament. That is my fear, that is my concern. So we have to unite to challenge this and stop it. Now, NATO General Secretary Mark Rutte has made clear that it is Europe that must secure these guarantees for Ukraine, so that the US can refocus its overwhelming military might towards China, to check China's economic growth and block its global influence. So because the US can't compete economically with China, it is corralling all its allies into militarily confronting it. So, for instance, the newly elected Japanese Prime Minister is now reviewing the country's fundamental non-nuclear policies that would enable the US to use Japanese docks for its nuclear submarines and even to station nuclear weapons in that country. Just think about that. This is the country that suffered the horrors of the atomic bombings by the US and is now in a situation where it's under pressure to be changing that nuclear policy so that the US can threaten and attack other countries in that region. And the US is still outspending all the nuclear weapon states combined. Last year, out of the $100 billion that was spent on nuclear weapons, more than half of that was spent by the US. And the year before, the US accounted for 80% of the total increase in nuclear weapons spending. And all of this is to defend and sustain a world order that has just brought us this horrific genocide, the climate catastrophe that we're facing, the huge levels of austerity, the increase in the far right, and now, of course, these terrible nuclear threats. The idea of a nuclear war with Russia, let alone China, is absolutely terrifying. It would be the end of civilization. It would destroy huge swathes of the planet, and whoever would be left would be faced with famine from the destroyed ecosystem. As we all know, no one wins a nuclear war. And that is why our cause for nuclear disarmament has never been more urgent than it is today. And because the stakes are so high, the calls for nuclear disarmament and the alternatives to war and nuclear annihilation are growing. We know that the war drive is only worsening the real security issues we face, from climate breakdown, rising social deprivation, and as I say, the rise of the far right. And the interconnectedness of these crises is critical to us strengthening our chances to halt them all. So we need to better coordinate ourselves. That's my strong message. I think that's a strong message that we're all coming out with here. So how can we make this happen? We are part of a global movement that wants nuclear disarmament, and we need to strengthen that now, that global cooperation and solidarity. So keeping the US and Russia to their word on this extending the START treaty, so basically to not increase their nuclear weapons, is absolutely critical. Re-establishing the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. This was the treaty that came in 1987, which was about banning those long-range missiles that have been used across Europe and escalating the situation so much. And getting the US, Russia and China to ratify the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty is absolutely urgent given Trump's statements. So building the global support for these is really, really important. April is the time for the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, the review conference, which is a big deal, and we should really use this as an opportunity to make that focus for these treaties. We know that people want a better future, and they want a better now. So pressure is building against the economic impact of the war drive and the out-of-control costs of the nuclear weapons industry. As Mikaela has said, we need to build on the success of the trade union opposition to militarism as a way to drive economic growth and jobs. And as she says, I think the vote at TUC is incredibly significant because it also shows, again, the interconnectedness of our movements. It is because of the magnificent, the huge struggle of Palestinian people and of the movement to support Palestinian people against the genocide that put pressure on those trade unions to not support the further increase in defence spending, but to vote against it, because the work had been done to show that the genocide is completely interlinked with these profits that are being made by these arms companies. And so that was a big factor in why that policy was passed. So this is very significant and incredibly serious, because this is a key part of the government's way to try and sell war readiness to us, isn't it? We have the solutions to lifting people out of poverty, ending social deprivation, and building sustainable economic growth. And we need a national debate on the alternatives and the solution to war and nuclear weapons. And as Mikaela was saying, the Alternative Defence Review is an absolutely brilliant tool for taking that debate out into the national public. We need to be working with the trade unions for defence diversification. So this is where you have, engineers who are working for British Aerospace are making wind turbines and not nuclear weapons. There is a real plan for economic growth that will lift people out of poverty and drive sustainable the energy sector and the public transport and education. These are sectors that can really drive economic growth and also provide the real sort of social network that we need and are absolutely critical for our very survival. These are totally linked with climate action and are driving real sustainable growth, and making young people have an opportunity to have a future and to have real jobs that are decent jobs, that are safe jobs, that make them feel that they have some kind of future for us. The pressure is building against nuclear threats. People understand the real dangers of nuclear war, especially young people. I'm sure all of us have seen the polling of More in Common that shows it's overwhelmingly young people that understand how serious the threat is. And young people are incredibly active and engaged. Students have secured huge wins in divestment against Israel. They are organising actions at arms industry, against the arms industry investment that's being directed into universities, like in Sheffield. They're involved in very important divestment campaigning work as well. And of course, with the government's plans to strengthen arms and the nuclear industry links with education, it makes it even more critical that we support young people's campaigns against this, and as I say, for decent jobs. Pressure is building against the worsening impacts of climate change. People want action. The government's own committee, the Joint Intelligence Committee, says it is the biggest security risk that we face. We must work together and push for this report to be published and action to be taken on it. And we need to put the spotlight on the bases. We need to show the nuclear dangers and the social deprivation that's completely linked to them, to show that nuclear weapons don't make us safe. Days for your diaries, which I'm sure you already have, RAF Marham on Saturday the 28th of February. That is an absolutely critical base. That's where these F-35A fighter jets are going to be based, but it's also the hub of the F-35 fighter jet programme, which we know that base has been used to transport F-35A parts directly to Israel. So it's completely complicit in the genocide there. Faslane, people might know Faslane, the nuclear site there where all the submarines are based. Huge levels of radioactive leakage that's really, really polluting that part of the world. Absolutely disgusting what's going on there. It's really, really critical that we put the spotlight on Faslane. There's going to be a demonstration on the 14th of March. Please all go to Scotland and take your solidarity. And then finally, Lakenheath. RAF Lakenheath is where there are now US nuclear bombs. These nuclear bombs I was talking about, these battlefield nuclear bombs, they are based at RAF Lakenheath, this US base, where we have no accountability. We know how terrible that situation is. It's really important, again, that we are putting the spotlight on these bases, but also we are taking action to try and stop the what's going on at those bases. So be part of that week-long peace camp that might well involve blockading, sitting down, stopping the action of that base. That's really, really important. And there's lots of other kind of effective work that you can do. And then finally, our task is to offer hope, isn't it? We are the ones that have the solutions. And we know that public protest has always secured the most progressive change in our society, and it has secured nuclear disarmament. It has forced those political leaders, when they didn't want to disarm their nuclear weapons. It has forced the US to, put its nuclear weapons out of Britain on many occasions. So we have to recognise that, and recognise that we are part of this very rich, strong, successful tradition of public protest and political protest in this country. So, we are united. We should be feeling powerful about the situation. As I say, the stakes are so high, but more and more people understand how serious the situation is and want to come together. So let's get involved. All of us come together. Let's work flat out to bring all of these movements together and to speak with one voice, offering the solutions and the hope for a better future. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophie. Brilliant summation of where we are, and I think that message of hope is something that everybody at this conference should be going away and passing on that positive energy to everybody else. So this is the part of the session where we get a chance for you to ask any questions. Now, I've been around long enough to know that comes out as I can give a long speech. right? But I know people are going to do that, give speeches, but please not long ones, right? Because the longer you go on, that means less space for anybody else to be able to contribute in this session. I really do want to get as many people into this session as we possibly can. So when I call on you to speak, can you give your name, organisation, where you come from, as well, and please keep it as short as you can. If you've got a particular question to ask to a particular panel member, then please make it clear who you're asking that question to. Is that okay? Yeah. So that's now a contract and a deal, okay?
My name is Brenda Topaz, and I'm involved with several organisations, including Jeremy Corbyn's People's Forum and Access Co-convenor. And I just have one question. I'm going to keep it as brief as possible. I would like to know if we were to have a reform government, as the Labour government is already trying to strip away our right to trial by jury, our right to peaceful protest, and life gets bleaker and bleaker and bleaker. Under a reform government, what will be CFD and Stop Wars default in terms of showing opposition to the government's proposals if we're not allowed to protest against them?
What I'm going to do is take three at a time and then come back. So I've got one there and one back there. So just here. Here. Thank you.
Okay, I just want to, I don't think we have talked. Stephanie Clark, member of CND, active in health campaigns on Palestine campaigns, and also a member of Global Justice Now. I just want to flag up, we haven't talked at all about the global injustices and global conflicts. So we've been talking about Ukraine, but not the Sudan, for instance. Yeah. And this is pretty general across the field. So I really want to rate. I mean, there are arguments. I don't think we should discount or ignore our colonial history and the impact that has, and the role of countries who've been subject to our colonialism, how that is fueling the immigration. It's presented as crisis now, people wanting to come to our country for safety and for a future. And also there are environmental implications as well.
Thank you. So, sister at the back there, while the microphone's going to the back there, some of you might know I'm a journalist and international editor of the Morning Star. So in last week's paper, I wrote a piece on Sudan. But also, importantly, I made the link between not just what's happening in Sudan, but the heightened military rhetoric from Trump against Nigeria as well, and how we have to look at those two things in the same vein as well. Right? It's very important that we don't miss that this is a part of a pattern about making sure that the West gets hold of all of those rich mineral resources that are underneath the feet of Africans at the moment. So please have a look at that article. Brilliant article.
Hi, Beth. I'm from Bristol. I'm a member of BSc in Bristol. I'm recently in Greencross as well. Thanks for that thing about the point on Sudan, because I didn't ask that earlier actually. In terms of like when you're trying to get the points across to people about sovereignty, and that we're not, by being in NATO, we actually give away our sovereignty to America and just have to follow them blindly into whatever they're doing in the world, which is destructive. What about the argument that you get back people of, well, if we come out of alliances with America, so forth, will be punished economically or will lose out economically? Is that addressed in some of the literature here, or could someone speak to that possibly?
Thank you. I'm going to come to the panel and then I'll come back for another round of three. Lindsay, do you want to jump in?
Okay, well, thanks. Thanks for those. Just very quickly on each of them. If there's a reform government, certainly we're going to have to really, really up the level of protest. But I think already, even under a Labour government, or maybe especially under a Labour government, I mean, Sophie's standing trial next year, as is the chair of Stop the War and the director of PSC and the vice chair of Stop the War. I mean, that's one thing. All the people from Defend Our Juries who are facing things, plus lots and lots of other people who are facing either they're in prison on remand, and the massive injustice of this is how long these trials are taking. You know, it's bad enough anyway, but people are waiting 18 months for a trial, which is complete denial of their human rights, actually. So already we've got these, and I think there's two ways of doing it. One is that you protest directly as the Defend Our Juries people, as we do with Palestine demonstrations, that you, one of the arguments has to be you keep protesting and you expand the protest. And as people have made the point, bring the different issues together, so you show solidarity with different people. And obviously you oppose the laws. But I think we've also got to step up the level of campaigning over these laws, because they are very, very restrictive for protest in every sense. And of course it won't just be, you know, something locks on to, you know, the people we were talking about earlier. It will be trade unionists on picket lines, and the whole thing about cumulative. I mean, I went on my first demonstration in 1969, which was over Stop the 72, the apartheid South Africa. How many years did we have to campaign over apartheid South Africa? Another 30 years before it ended. Look at Palestine, we've been doing it for 80 years nearly. So of course people have got the right and the duty actually to keep campaigning, and I think it's very important we do that. I very much agree about Sudan and the question of Nigeria. I mean, today there's some story about a Christian girls' school that's been attacked, and they're building this up as, you know, communal violence, as they always do. You know, the idea that people from the former colonies can't live properly, can't live with each other. It was only the British that stopped them from killing each other for so many years. And it's a complete lie, as we're aware. And I agree, we should be saying more about Sudan, particularly because Britain has a long history of colonialism there, but indirectly it's very much back in the UAE, which is very, very centrally involved in what is going on there. So yeah, totally agree with that. And in Bristol, the point that you said, is there any literature about if we break with the US, will we be punished? I mean, this is, you know, the US has, you know, all this stuff, like they've been doing everybody a favour for the last 80 years by having bases in Europe. There was never anything the US did in Europe that it didn't do to advance its interests and to have political clout. And we have to keep getting that across, and we have to keep getting across, actually, we are paying the United States vast amounts of money for so-called defence of our country, and the very least we should be able to do is to decide for ourselves what we want to spend it on. And of course this goes back to the whole imperialist nature of the US, and Britain, having lost an empire, can't bear but doing anything but hang on to the one that still exists, and that's what they're doing.
I'll just respond on what happens if protest gets further restricted. I agree, doesn't mean that you stop protesting necessarily, but also we have to carry on with all the other types of campaigning that we do. One of the things that Quakers try to do is engage with people across different viewpoints and find common ground, which is something very difficult to do with certain politicians, but doesn't mean that we shouldn't stop trying. And also engage with our neighbours, have conversations, find the common ground, and spread information. So obviously the media is dominated by certain interests, but it doesn't mean that we can't spread information through word of mouth and through other forms of media and social media.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I agree with Lindsay in terms of the attacks on the right to protest are happening under, you know, they happened under, you know, Conservative government, and now they are, you know, sort of intensifying under a Labour government. And I think part of the problem we've got is we've got a Labour government that's so right-wing, it's so reactionary, that it's just sort of creating the conditions for greater support for reform. That's what it's doing. It's just totally strengthening reform. So we have to be kind of campaigning now, as we are doing, to expose why are these further attacks on the right to protest coming in, and that's because the government is it's trying to defend the indefensible, isn't it? It's still trying to defend its record in terms of its complicity in the genocide. It's still trying to do that, and it's now carrying out the most this absolutely huge attack on working people through funneling hundreds of billions of public funds away from our public services into war and militarism. And so it's wanting to, how does it divert attention from that? It says, oh, small boats, you know what I mean? So that's kind of what it's doing, which is completely strengthening, reform. But in terms of so that's what it's doing, and therefore it's going to continue to attack us when we expose that. But obviously we have to continue to expose that. And I think that, as Lindsay was saying, there's different ways of protesting, isn't there? But I think it's absolutely critical that we are politically challenging what the government is doing, that is trying to, stop us from exposing. So it's absolutely critical that we stand up and challenge all this racism, this really disgusting, horrific kind of racist policies that are coming out from this government. It's really, really important. As I say, CND's we are very proud to be part of this united movement that's coming out against the far right. And one of the central things about that is to be challenging all the racism, to stand up to it, not to let it go. So I think, that's absolutely critical. And then in terms of, this issue around sort of the, sovereignty, and if we were to kind of if we were to leave NATO, would we be kind of penalised? I mean, I'd say we're penalised for being in NATO, aren't we? Where NATO states across Europe and here in Britain are under the cosh from the NATO leadership and from the Trump administration that we have got to, whatever the cost is to the people of our countries, is we have got to increase military spending to 5% of GDP. We have got to subordinate our security issues like our economies, our defence, policies have all got to be subordinated to the interests of NATO and to Trump's global war. And that is very, very dangerous for us. It totally puts us on the front line. It means that we have nuclear weapons in our country that are incredibly dangerous, where there could be a nuclear accident at any moment. That means that we are much more likely to be a target in, the event of a US, led war. So on every level, we're penalised now, aren't we? And so it's absolutely critical that more and more people understand that NATO is not this lovely fluffy umbrella that keeps us all safe. It's the absolute opposite of that. Absolute opposite of that. So I think that's really important. I think I'll leave that there.
I don't think there's a lot to add to what everyone has said so far. On the issue of reform, I just really want to reiterate what has been said, that actually this crackdown and affront on our civil liberties is happening right now under a Labour government. The racist scapegoating of migrants is happening right now under a Labour government. Yeah. So a lot of the time we talk about, well, what happens if reform get in? But actually, what are the current Labour government doing? They're saying they're going to stop the vote. They're saying that all of our problems are because of migrants. They're saying that they prescribe any action in support of and against the genocide of the Palestinian people. So actually, we need to expose this Labour government for what it is, basically. And actually, when they're talking about British sovereignty, what does British sovereignty actually mean to us? I think personally, the biggest threat to British sovereignty is our subservience to the US. US arms companies in this country, and actually us hosting US nukes, which actually the people of Britain have no say over. So we need to be challenging this right now. We need to be talking more openly and honestly within our movement, our Labour movement, all of our peace organisations, about what an independent foreign policy actually means. And what does that mean? We cannot be in NATO whilst we want an independent foreign policy that is based on peace and social justice, one of which that is based on mutual respect. Because one thing is, you cannot be in NATO and have any kind of independent say without the US telling us what we have to do. So I think when we're talking about sovereignty and when we're talking to British people about that, I think that's something that we need to really stress that point. And on Sudan, often it's called like the forgotten war. It's something that we really need to raise sort of awareness of as well in our peace movement, our peace campaigning. And I think the Morning Star has covered this, but we need to have a lot more coverage of this war, but also building our understanding across the movement of imperialism, of colonialism, and what that means globally. Because right now, I think class consciousness, any consciousness of imperialism, is very low, despite we have lots of people coming out in favour of peace. We have lots of people horrified by the genocide in Gaza. We need to develop the understanding of why these things are happening. So I think that's something that I wanted to add, and I think that's got to be a priority for us as well. Thanks.
Can I just want to add something, actually, as I've got the mic. And the issues about racism have been raised. I started school literally weeks after the Rivers of Blood speech by Enoch Powell, and I remember what it was like trying to walk to school every morning and being attacked as a 5-year-old every morning, and then being attacked in school, and then having to worry about how I was going to get home. So me and my brother's 1 year older than me. So you got a 5-year-old and a 6-year-old having to work out how you're going to get to school in one piece and how you're going to get home in one piece. And I see this same kind of, it's called a hostile environment. I see it now, and I have never seen it as bad as it is now, actually. And it just keeps reminding me of what it was like in that sort of time, and the fact that you've got leading politicians, including the Prime Minister, and he cannot get away from this about what he said those weeks ago, right? Disgusting stuff. He cannot try and worm his way out of what he said. He stoked up racism, right? And there's no two ways about it. And he gave the signal to everybody else in his party who was up for that that's what they could do. And some of them did it. But what it also did was play to that reform agenda, right? And when you see some of the stuff that's been coming out in this last week or so about immigration policy and all the rest of it, it's disgusting. But remember this, lots of people went through a lot of that stuff before. You know, I remember having conversations with my parents in the early 80s when Thatcher brought in a lot of that stuff, same sort of stuff, which was demonising us. And remember this is not just about migrants, right? And it's also not just about us black people who are actually born here. This is about all of us, right? This is about all of you and me, and about what they feel about us, and they recognise us, as has been said here, about the power of us coming together. They know that. That's why they're dividing us against each other, because they know the strength that comes in when we stand together and organise together. And one of the biggest things that they've seen is these marches for the Palestinians, actually. People of all sorts coming together, people who've never been on a demonstration before, coming together, who are now veterans of marches, because they see, and our test really is how we can unite these campaigns together. I'll just add one other quick thing that we can't also leave out of this, and that's the military build-up that's taking place in the Caribbean at the moment as well. I mean, this is no small thing. This is huge. right? And it's a threat not just to the Venezuelans, right? It's a threat to this whole region that calls itself a zone of peace, right? It's saying you don't have the right to do that, right? Because you're in our backyard, right? So unless we unite these campaigns together and make sure people understand that these are not just isolated things on different continents, right? Unless we understand that and go out and have the conversations with people on that basis, then we're not going to go any further forward. So that is the speech at the beginning. I said I wasn't going to do it, but I think it's important. 1, 2, and 3, so they're all in a cluster there. So Sister Des first.
Hi, thank you everyone for this fantastic day, and I completely mirror what everyone's been saying about us coming together better and organising. And from our panel earlier, a lot of that was to do with bringing our resources for how we can reach more people from in localised areas within the university space. And I just wanted to make everyone aware that we have an open letter at the moment, particularly for the unions to be aware of, which is calling for universities to end their complicity in war. This is a real awareness boost, and what has happened with our engagement with unions already is it's led to motions being passed for full demilitarisation at that level too, and of course more access and awareness around how we can actually shift and how we have been shifting policy towards armed exclusion within the education space. So please all sign that open letter. Thank you.
So you need to say you're from demilitarised. Not everybody knows that.
From demilitarised.
That's just it. This work, Jennifer, first.
Okay, please. Here you go. I just want to offer my services. I've been a cameraman most of my life, and I've specialised in making films of famines and wars and genocide. I've seen it all. I should have retired, but I'm now starting to make films that I want to make. And the bottom line is, will this make it a fairer, safer, more equal world? And I'm interested in people who want to help me do that. I'd just like to read a very brief quote which inspires me every day from George Bernard Shaw. This is the true joy in life, being used for a purpose recognized by yourself as a mighty one, being a force of nature instead of a feverish, selfish little clod of ailments and grievances, complaining that the world will not devote itself to making you happy. I am of the opinion that my life belongs to the whole community, and as long as I live, it is my privilege to do for it what I can. I want to be thoroughly used up when I die, for the harder I work, the more I live. I rejoice in life for its own sake. Life is no brief candle to me. It is a sort of splendid torch which I've got hold of for the moment, and I want to make it burn as brightly as possible before handing it on to future generations.
Thank you. Can you hear me all right? Yes. Right. Well, first of all, I didn't mean to say this, but can I make a heartfelt apology to Roger for the racism that he suffered from everybody in this meeting?
Well, you didn't do it.
I didn't do it, but I can tell how it's affected you. You're welcome. Serious question. Guardian reported on a $1 trillion deal between Saudi Arabia and Donald Trump to buy F-35s and Abrams tanks. So that is a bit of bad breaking news. Would you care to comment, please?
Take the brother there, and then we'll go back to the panel. Thank you.
Hi, thanks. It's easy to say that all these issues are joined up: peace, civil rights, migrant rights, climate, the economy, workers' rights. it's harder to know how in practice to start making those links. And when I think of my own local environment, it is difficult to identify different groups, to find the right people to reach across. I do feel I suspect there is more that people at the top of these organisations, and I'm thinking, for example, of TSC, CND, Stand Up to Racism, and others. At present, they're very much separate constituencies, both at a local and a national level. And I feel there's more that the leaders of these organisations could do to help us make those connections. Thank you.
Sorry, Lindsay.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things that I like the quote from George Bernard Shaw. I'm a big fan of Shaw and his hatred of arms manufacturers, among other things. The Saudis and Trump and the $1 trillion deal, well, yeah, I think it's very, very frightening, not entirely surprising. Trump he's got a plan for the Middle East, which involves the Palestinians being kept effectively in camps, which is what they're going to do already with Gaza, and then they're doing it in the West Bank, or they're trying to do it in the West Bank as well. And the Saudis, they don't really care who they work with, because this is the man who supposedly gave the order for Khashoggi, the journalist, to be killed in Istanbul. I mean, these are despicable people. They've got a terrible human rights record, but of course, when it comes to Western hypocrisy, there's just nothing like it, really, is there? Because there's all these, you get everything about Iran or about Korea or about China. These are all threats, and yet this is a country with no democracy, a brutal, it's a monarchy, but a brutal dictatorship, effectively, which relies on migrant labour in order to do the work very much in the country. And yes, it doesn't surprise me at all that the weapons are going to be there, but I think there are problems for them, because I think even the Saudis have been very, very unhappy about what's happened around Gaza. And one of the big things we should remember in the Middle East is that the question of the Palestinians is like, for us, the question of the NHS, in the sense that it's every single person in the Arab world understands what they know. It's their own rotten, corrupt rulers, the dictators and the monarchs, who've allowed this to happen. So I think it should be part of what we campaign around. Then the other question was how do you make links with the different campaigns? I mean, I know it's a problem in the sense that people, if you're in a particular town, you've got different groups and people can't do everything. So they make a choice about what their priorities are at different times. And I think that's absolutely fair enough. You can't just have a kind of everybody goes. I mean, we know, I won't get into the question of your party, because that's probably more divisive than anything else we could say in the room. We know there are attempts for left-wing organisations, political parties, and that's absolutely right if people want to create or build political parties. But the question is, can you link up over the specific issues? You see, for example, the Palestine campaign, there are 6 organisations who all have different views and different values, in a sense. They've got different things that they prioritise, but they regard this as so important that it's worth making sure it's a priority over other things. With the question of racism and fascism, to me, this is one of the biggest questions we're facing, which, as people have made the point, that this is a big, big rise in racism. And these flags are absolutely terrifying. And I think they're terrifying. They're obviously terrifying for Black and Asian people, for any visible ethnic minority. But I think they're very terrifying for a lot of white people as well, because most people, I think there was a poll about this, which I'd have to dig out, most people don't like them. Most people just think they know what they're doing. If somebody puts up a Union Jack on their window or in their garden, who cares, really? I mean, you might have an opinion on it, but it's not important. If there's 50 down the road, it's there to intimidate people. It's not there for decoration. It's not there to make us all feel proud of the flag. And I really feel we should be doing much more campaigning. I mean, I'm too old and too small to climb up the ladder and get these flags down. But I really wish that more people would be doing this, to tell the truth. I don't know if there's anybody here who can do this, but we have to link these things. So I think there is a general sense for unity across the movement because we face bigger threats than we faced for many, many years. And that's what we have. I don't think we should say, don't have your own campaigns. I think people want to do that and it's important they do it. But we do need to say, if there are things we can unite around, then we have to do that. And for example, with Stop the War, as I said earlier, we've always had Islamophobia. Opposition to attacks on civil liberties, opposition to Islamophobia are the two other demands as well as Stop the War. And to me, they're much more important than they were 24 years ago, and they're going to get more important. So I'm happy to work with anybody who wants to campaign around those issues, and we have to work together with people to campaign against those issues. The Muslim community were the greatest community over the Iraq War, over Palestine, over everything else, and they're being penalised by this government and the far right for doing so, and we have to stand up for them.
Yeah.
Sending me a flagpole after this.
But you're very
tall. Yeah, I agree. I think we can still all be involved in our areas that we are passionate about, but we have to join up the issues when we're talking about them. And I think the way that we do that is we talk about the values that sit beneath all of our issues. And that's what I love about working for the Quakers, is that those values of peace and truth and equality and sustainability are underneath everything that Quakers campaign on, and they campaign on all the issues that I care about because they come from that place of those values and of believing that everyone is equal and that everyone has something with God in them. And I think it's also about our shared goals. We all want well-funded public services, clean air, greater equality, and so everyone can campaign for different issues while working towards the same goals and also backing each other up when it really matters the most. When there's a big moment where we need each other's support, we have to come to each other's aid. And that's what we have seen happen with Gaza, is that the environmental movement has joined in the pro-Palestinian movement, and the movements are coming together because that was the moment when they really needed to. And I think we need more of that, joining up the issues and coming together at the key moments. And that does involve educating people within the movement as well about racial justice and how it relates to climate justice and how it relates to peace, because there's still quite a lot of work to do, I think. And somebody mentioned colonialism. You know, some people are only just starting to get their heads round these issues, and whoever is learning about them needs to gently bring other people with them as well, I think.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I totally agree with that, and I really hope that everybody takes that from this meeting. I think just in terms of the stuff around, what's the latest sort of terrible deal that the US has sort of made with whatever country it is to try and, this is all about making the world far more dangerous, isn't it? And this is just another example of that, of like making the situation in the Middle East, even more dangerous, even more volatile, pushing it further and further away from where it needs to be in terms of, sort of for peace and justice for the Palestinian people and for their, their right to self-determination. It's sort of pushing it further and further away from that. And I suppose it kind of made me think about the role that the US is playing in terms of, under Trump, of massively kind of intensifying pressure on countries to be part of the US missile defense system. So especially, not only in the Asia Pacific, but also across Europe. Again, there's a huge pressure on countries to massively increase their military spending, but then to use that to then build more of these kind of radar bases, or bases of anything to do with this, the missile defense system. And what's that all about? That is all about the US trying to maintain or kind of create a sort of nuclear preeminence. So that's rather than the sort of the house of dynamite version of missile defence as being kind of defensive, you know, oh, the missiles are coming in and we've got to knock them out. It was really designed for the opposite, so that it's designed to stop countries from being able to retaliate against a nuclear attack, so that it creates the conditions of 1945 when the US was the only country that had nuclear weapons and used them. So, you know, that I just feel is, and that's massively, you know, up the agenda again in terms of, you know, the sort of the nuclear aggression of the Trump administration. So, as I say, we're seeing that across not just, you know, Asia Pacific, but also now in Europe, you know, a huge increase on that. And say that is just all about making the world far more dangerous. And so it comes back to the point of like, what kind of world do we want, isn't it? You know, we've got a sort of a world where that kind of, you know, sort of like unipolar, you know, US, you know, is a sort of the police, judge and jury type thing of the world. This is, you know, where it's got us to is absolute sort of disaster, and it's absolutely clear that we need a change, and the world is changing, you know. And I think it was great to hear from Mikaela, who was talking about this sort of shift in terms of the global south, you know, greater kind of global cooperation on key issues like trade, but also on climate change. So there is a huge shift kind of going on. So it's also understanding that we want to be part of this kind of wider movement here amongst ourselves, but also globally. You know, we have to be part of that movement that is already wanting a different world, a world that is based on global cooperation, peace, justice, equality, you know, and actually abiding by international law.
I don't want to add to, I echo everything that our previous panel speakers have said, particularly on the Saudi Arabia-US deal. I think it's obviously really about the US's interests here and nobody else's. And, you know, Saudi Arabia is a country that we call a strong ally, but frankly, whilst the people of the Middle East feel very strongly about Palestine and care about the issue of Palestine and Gaza, their rulers have completely betrayed the Palestinian people in their rights for self-determination, sovereignty, and peace. On the issue of bringing our struggles together, I think trade unions must do a lot more in working in unity together across the labour movement, but with other progressive struggles in Britain. I think that we have strength in our differences, but on our commonalities, we have to come together. So instead of fighting in the trade union movement, you might see us fighting a lot of the time in our own secular interests. We have to fight and come together to fight in the movement's interests. And I do think that we need to be leading from the front in this. But actually, I think this event itself is us coming together. I'm a member of CND, but I came to CND through the trade union movement and through the fact that I care about my public services, the fact that I care about our members that work here, and that's how I came through to the peace movement. So I think this event in itself is that this report, the Alternative Defence Review, is us coming together. So we need to do more of it. Thank you.
Can I ask you all to give the panel a great big hand, please? Thank you so much. Really enjoyed that session. And can I ask you all as well to thank all the staff and the volunteers who've made today happen. A bit more energy than that, please. So there's still time to get hold of a load of the brilliant merchandise and things, but also as well, if you haven't got like a pocket full of these or bag full of these, can you get them, but not just like to sit on a shelf somewhere? You know, we need to think about how we can get this used and talked about in local communities. This is Roger Mackenzie speaking now, please. So if you could just humour me for a moment, please. Yeah, it's really important that we make sure that this isn't just about coming together today and having a nice day. This is about doing something with the information that we've gathered together today. The brilliant sadly for me, late poet and activist June Jordan always said this: we are the ones that we've been waiting for. Right? Nobody else is going to do this for us. Nobody else is going to build the peace movement that we need to confront the kind of challenges that we face today. So it's up to us to do that. And part of that is making sure that we have a massive presence at RAF Marham on the 28th of February as well. Can you all make sure that you do that and just get people along? If you can't get there, make sure somebody else can get there as well. We also need to build the membership of CND as well. So if you can recruit at least one more person to CND, right? There's your challenge. If you can recruit at least one more person to CND, please do that, because we need to grow our numbers as big as we can. I'm also told as well that follow CND on social media. Apparently I spend far too much time on social media, but if you don't, then here's your chance to join me on the dark side and be part of that movement to boost the number of people who hear our messages as well. And finally, there's a chance for a bit of social time as well. After this, we're going to somewhere called Mama's Shelter at 6 o'clock. Apparently it's only about 5 minutes or so away. I think on the back of your programmes there's a little map. Please come along. I mean, do people have to buy drinks? Or,
No.
So this is like the moment of a lifetime. You'll have to